call this meeting of the Guadalupe-Blanco River Authority Board of Directors to order in accordance with the Texas Open Meetings Act, Government Code 551, and certify the quorum of the board is present. Mr. Casson, the ball notice has been posted.
Yes, sir.
Director Fogel, would you lead us in the order?
May I mention something just a minute before we start the debate? If you are a veteran, by act of the President of the United States, it is proper for you to use a hand salute when you pledge allegiance to the flag. Now, let me start. I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Now the Texas flag.
Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state under God, one and indivisible.
Well, welcome everybody. I'm glad to see everyone here. This is going to be an absolutely full meeting, so we will get right down to it. Let me make a couple of comments on public comments. This portion of the meeting is intended for comments from the public on non-agenda related items. Please limit comments to 3 minutes. To address the board, please sign in and completely fill out the attendance sheet maintained at the entrance to the building where the meeting is being held. No responses or action may be taken by the board during public comments. To address the board related to an item posted on the agenda for action or discussion, please indicate the item number you wish to comment on. The attendance sheet, the board will call individuals to make comments at the appropriate time. Do we have anyone signed in?
Mr. Chairman, we have 2 people signed in, but I believe they're both on items. One is item 22, and I just asked Ms. Salazar if you wanted to comment now or on item 6 on the hydro lakes. I'm assuming that's
You can comment now.
okay.
Sure.
You're welcome.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Hi. First, I'm very grateful that we didn't drain our lakes. And I'm a little bit saddened that we had to take time and money to get to where we are now. And I'm very thankful that we made a decision to get an expert panel to evaluate imminent danger on our hydro lakes. However, I do have a consideration I would ask the board and GBRA to take into account. My husband, Major Alfred Salazar Jr., and I retired, or I'm still retired. He's back working for a Pentagon, but we bought a house on Lake Placid. We are on a very small street, Erskine Ferry. Our house has been there since 1948. It has survived 99 flood, 98 flood, 2009 flood, and most recently it survived the catastrophic failure at Lake Dunlap with only an increase in flow and very few inches of water. None came into anyone's yard. That being said, we now find ourselves in a restricted and safe zone. We don't own a boat. We own 66 feet of Guadalupe River frontage. We cannot go in that water. We cannot swim. We cannot float. We cannot be in it. If we wanted to access the Guadalupe River that we own frontage on, we can merely drive to Sun's Island that I could throw a baseball and hit from my yard and pay to access the river that we own a home on. And we, like as I said, we are a very small street. My question and concern is, what is the differential that takes our 10 homes, 4 permanent residents, and the rest are vacation homes? What takes our permanent residents an additional, which it comprises additional 1,000 feet of river frontage between us and Sun's Island, that makes them remain open and we're closed? It devalues our property. It keeps us from living our dream of being and enjoying the Guadalupe River. And is it a matter of inches? Is it a matter of flow or worst case scenario? We would like that explained to us why, because once you get to the end of our street, which is a dead end, it's Acme Brick. There's no residents. There's immediately across from us is CMC Steel. There is no residents. So between us and where we are we're bordered on the upstream by Zip Creek, and we go back to Acme Brick. Again, it's a small street, but it's people with investments and homes and the right to be on the water. Unless there's some huge differential, we're asking that you move those barriers back to the last residence on Erskine Ferry Road, which then becomes commercial, non-residential, and people who wouldn't be in the water swimming anyway, in that portion that involves us. As you go further along, before you get to the red, there are more residents. I am only speaking for our group of residents on Erskine Ferry, and ask that as we're in the process of setting these boundaries and everything, that you take in consideration that we're there. Because sometimes when there's catastrophes and stuff like that, they forget we're there, because we're just a little street. But we're people, and we have homes, and we want to be in the water.
Thank you, Ms. Salazar.
Thank you.
I don't have anyone else signed in right now, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, so let's move into the consent items, which I would take as a group, unless someone would like to pull one out. As questions on. I'd entertain a motion. Move to approve. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Passage.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For item 6, we're pivoting a little bit to talk about the safety report that came out late Monday afternoon. We recognize that there are going to be a lot of questions about that report. It's definitely going to be subject to interpretation. There'll be obviously requests for exemptions, and so we're going to be very careful about answering those questions at this time because we just got the report. Obviously, there are a number of parties, a number of attorneys involved. Interpretation can certainly be different depending on who you talk to, and at the end of the day, it is a court order, and we want to make sure that we're not running foul of the judge's order. So we do believe that the face of the order says once the safety report has been issued that the safe zones are open, that no additional action is required. We believe that is automatic. There's a number of things in the safety report as far as buoys and additional signage that needs to be implemented. That will take some time to get all of that ordered and in place. We don't know how much time we're assessing that right now. But at the same time, we don't believe that has to be in place before the safe parts of the lake are open. But again, we're going to make sure that we're going to compile all everyone's questions. We're going to continue to put out FAQs as we have definitive answers. But some of the stuff that we're not going to weigh in on yet is on purpose because, again, we want to make sure we consult with the other parties to the case and ultimately the judge as well, because he has the right to obviously amend his order if he so chooses. The path forward today, we're going to have Sam Ball, who was one of the designated expert members for the panel with HDR, come up and talk about the report. We did invite the other side's expert, Greg Long, to come. He had some conflicts and couldn't. I do believe this was, the concept of this was blessed by the parties in the litigation. I'd like to thank all of them, Sam, Greg Long, and Chief Nimkid with the Division of Emergency Management for their time and their quick work in doing this. They did ask for 30 additional days just on Gonzales for some additional modeling they wanted to do there. But the other lakes have been evaluated. The other thing we're going to do later on in the agenda is talk about amending the ordinance that y'all previously adopted. We're going to attempt to amend the ordinance to conform with what the expert's opinion states. Again, we're going to go ahead and do that, and then ask, make sure that's okay with the judge at some point when we get back in front of him that that's the right path to do. We believe it is the right path to take. So we're going to ask y'all to amend that ordinance. We haven't heard feedback yet from, at least complete feedback yet from the county attorney on that ordinance because we wanted to make sure it's enforceable. He's committed to get us some feedback, but to the extent he has changes, we'll be back to y'all in November to amend that ordinance accordingly, again, to comply with what the expert's opinion says. So with that, I would like to invite Sam Ball up to talk about the expert's report for him.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Mr. Patterson, appreciate the opportunity to visit with you today. I'm going to talk about the summary of our independent expert panel report. Number one, as I go through this, if you do have any questions, please feel free to jump right in, stop me right where I am, and ask those questions. I'll do my best to respond on behalf of the panel. The first thing we did as an independent expert panel was to make sure that we clearly identified our charges and what our job was to do under the agreed temporary injunction and under the instructions of the court. We looked at those charges, and those are listed here on the screen. We've identified unsafe zones. If we did find some unsafe zones, then we were to prescribe safety measures to be associated with those zones. And thirdly, if there were circumstances in which property owners needed to access those zones, how would that procedure work? The independent expert panel, as Mr. Patterson said, was comprised of 3 individuals. I am the GBRA designated expert. The plaintiff's designated expert was Greg Line of Hewitt Zollers from Houston. And the third designated expert was Nim Kidd, the chief of the Texas Division of Emergency Management. In accordance with the procedure laid out in the temporary injunction, Greg and I were to choose the third designated expert. So it took a little while to identify 4 good candidates who were willing to serve and have the qualifications to serve. And then Greg and I agreed on Mr. Kidd, Chief Kidd, and he's been a great addition to the panel. He really balances the 2 engineers with the perspective of someone who's involved in emergency management, rescue, firefighting background. He asks good questions and thinks a little differently than an engineer, which was great for the panel. We operated under a number of key assumptions. I didn't list them all on the screen, but I need to put a few up there just to be very clear. The responses to the charges, our report, is based on the relevant information that we received. We got good information from GBRA, from the plaintiffs, from the technical consultants, from our own staffs at HDR and Hewitt Zollers, other sources, and also our own experiences as professionals and our professional judgment. And yes, there were time constraints. There are things that one could look into, but there's only so much time. We worked on the information available to us, and we appreciate the contributions of GBRA's staff and the plaintiffs and folks who all provided input to us. Another fundamental key assumption is nowhere in, on, or immediately adjacent to the water is 100% safe. There's an element of risk anytime you're on the water. And sometimes when you're standing beside it, it can rise quickly and things can change very quickly. Another key assumption is we focused in on a failure of a single gate. And that failure on a sunny day. Okay, a sunny day different from a flood situation where the river's already coming up, it's raining, people know what's going on, versus it's just a beautiful day and suddenly the gate goes. We looked at these as the most likely and the most critical failure scenario. Finally, we assumed that the GBRA monitoring and communication with county emergency management and activation of the sirens here in Seguin are timely and effective. And through conversations with GBRA staff and the emergency management coordinator, we do believe that to be the case. So we have prohibited unsafe zones and restricted unsafe zones. And operating within our panel to develop the consensus type report, we decided it was very important to have criteria that we would use to support our decisions. So focusing in first on the situation of a prohibited unsafe zone. This is an area in which all activities in or on the water. So I have them listed up there on the screen. The activities in or on the water are to be prohibited. Focusing first on areas upstream of a gate that could fail. Our criteria there was the distance upstream required to swim, 1 foot per second, starting out at the center of the lake, to safety on the shore, with water flowing at the maximum velocity that would be associated with that failing gate. And then actually adding in a 25% factor of safety, because when you're out there in the water in that situation, it may take time to recognize that a hazardous situation has even occurred. You might not make the right decision right away. So that was our criteria for a prohibited unsafe zone upstream of a gate that might fail. Safety measures associated with that would be to install buoys and signage to warn people on the lake, residents and the general public who might access the lakes, so that they know that is not an area to be and what the restrictions are, which are no activities in or on the water in those areas. Another type of prohibited unsafe zone is downstream of a gate that might fail. A situation with an instantaneous failure, the river can go from a limited flow to 11 to 13,000 CFS almost instantly. So in those areas, we looked at the distance downstream at which the increased depth from a floodway would exceed 4 feet, and or the increased velocity would be about 60 per second. Okay? And with that within 30 minutes of the gate failure. Some of those things, if you're immediately below a dam, are going to happen a lot faster than 30 minutes. It's going to be instant. And we looked at references of importance that where when you combine the depth of water with the velocity of water, somebody who's in the water loses their stability. Usually the product of depth times velocity, if it gets greater than 10, an adult person will lose their stability in the water. Think about it, 3 feet deep, if the water's moving 3 feet per second, that's 9. 3 times 3 is 9. That's going to affect you. And so those kinds of thoughts were in our minds, and this was our criteria for prohibited unsafe zones downstream of gates. Again, safety measures, signage and buoys to be very clear about delineating those areas and what's prohibited in those areas. Another unsafe zone is a restricted unsafe zone. And this is primarily downstream of the gates. This is an area where it's less unsafe to be boating, but it's still unsafe to be swimming, wading, or tubing, because of the possibility of a very rapid change and increase in velocity of the flows. The threshold we set there is about 4 feet per second within 30 minutes of an upstream gate failure. Again, think about that depth times velocity product of 10. Okay? If it's 4 feet deep, you're out there, or your grandchild is out there swimming around, and their head's bobbing and their feet are touching, and suddenly the water's moving 4 feet per second. Their feet aren't touching anymore, and that water's coming up quite fast. Yes, sir.
So the water's always flowing. What's the normal flow rate?
And the velocity would typically be on the order of 1 or 2 tenths of a foot per second. It's relatively slow. Now, I'm sure yeah, there's a range there, but it's near zero, let's put it that way. And what we look at is the total velocity from the simulations. Okay. And so in those areas restricted unsafe zones, it's reasonably safe for boating, or less unsafe. But a key factor there that the panel felt was very important is in those restricted zones, in recognition of the heightened degree of risk, a properly fitted Type 1 or Type 3 PFD should be worn at all times for all activities on the water in the restricted zone. You're not allowed to be swimming, but even if you're on a boat in those zones, you should have on your life jacket properly fitted, and a good quality life jacket. I speak from personal experience on this. My wife wouldn't be with me if she wasn't wearing her life jacket when we flipped the raft in the Grand Canyon last year. I like my wife, and I'm really glad she had on the PFD and had it on correctly. Okay, so what are the zones specifically? I reached on to the website, gvlakes.com. These maps are not directly from our report. Someone was able to make 4 maps to portray what I put into 8 maps in the report. So I thought this might be a little easier, and these are pretty clear on the screen and available online. Focusing first on Lake McQueen and the upper end of Lake Placid, we have a prohibited unsafe zone upstream of the dam, TP3, found in McQueen, as well as downstream just beyond State Highway 78. Below State Highway 78 in Lake Placid, there's a restricted unsafe zone that extends down to about Sun's Island, just above Sun's Island. You heard a member of the public speaking about that area a few moments ago. In the lower end of Lake Placid, we have a prohibited unsafe zone immediately upstream of TP4. And then downstream of TP4, that prohibited unsafe zone extends as well. And then there's a segment of the Guadalupe River sort of between Lake Placid and Meadow Lake that is a restricted unsafe zone due to high velocities that could occur in the event of a gate failure at Lake Placid. And then we get down to the area approaching the boat access in Max Starkey Park and Saffold Dam, the old mill dam here in town. If people are accessing the water immediately upstream of that uncontrolled weir there in the park and rapidly increasing velocities, there's a significant hazard there. So we added and included a prohibited unsafe zone from just at that boat access or that river access in Max Starkey Park downstream to the confluence of Walnut Branch. And there it operates somewhat like a river as well. In fact, there's tubing in the past there, but the velocities can be very, very high, well in excess of the 4 feet per second that was our criteria. So that is a prohibited unsafe zone. And beyond Walnut Branch and moving around the bend and up to the northernmost point of the river, just down from where we are today, that is a restricted zone. So boating is allowable in there with a properly fitted PFD on the person. Advance one. Slowly. There we go. And then down the lower end of Meadow Lake at Nolte Dam, TP5, we have a prohibited zone upstream of that dam. And then also downstream, all the way around Nolte Island and almost to FM 466. That's a really challenging area there because much of the water in the normal flow of the river is moving through the hydropower canal. And the river itself is very low. In the event of a gate failure at Nolte Dam, that would go from a trickle to a wall of water in almost no time. So that is a prohibited, unsafe zone. From 466 on down to FM 1117, there are high velocities that would occur in that area, and we made that a restricted, unsafe zone. Voting okay with a properly fitted PFD on the person. So lastly, that kind of addresses the unsafe zones as well as the safety measures recommended to go with those zones. In terms of access for folks who live or have need access to a prohibited unsafe zone, we recommend that be by GBRA issued permit only. And we recommend that that be done with comprehensive immunity. If a person is going to be out in a prohibited unsafe zone, that person's there at their own risk. Properly fitted PFD, again, for all activities, monitoring the water, movement close to the shoreline, not out in the middle of the river or the lake, and the shortest distance possible to go from the residence home or the place of business to exit the prohibited unsafe zone. And finally, a copy of the permit in possession, so that enforcement officials can do what they need to do. Those are the remarks that I have for today, summarizing our report. It was, I will say that the panel, we worked very effectively together. It is a consensus report. There were no raised voices or pounding fists on the table. It was very collaborative. Good questions were asked by each member of the panel and contributions made. We still have some work to do. Our second report is due no later than the 15th of November. We expect some technical data that's essential for applying our criteria and making our recommendations for those. For the segment from State Highway 80 down to County Road 143, including Lake Gonzales. We expect that any day now. And we'll turn our report around in time and be within the constraints of the injunction. With that, I'll stop talking and start listening. Respond to questions if you have. Yes, sir.
Give me an idea of what does 1 foot per second in swinging speed equivalent to? What is a high school swimmer go at? What is a collegiate swimmer? I mean, what kind of idea is that? I have no idea if that's fast or slow, I guess.
Okay, well, that's an excellent question. Typically, according to our research, a good swimmer can do about 2.9 feet per second or so. A poor swimmer or a child or someone wearing a PFD, which could slow you down a little bit swimming, keeps you on top. It might slow your swimming speed down a little. So we put in, we went to 1 foot per second to provide a measure, a factor of safety there.
At FM, is it 1117 where the end of your report stopped, is that correct?
Yes, sir. That is where report number 1 stops.
Okay, at that point, will GBRA be putting warnings up at that location as well about this being a restricted, unsafe zone?
That is not something that we addressed. We really did not, because our charge within the injunction ended at 1117. That's where we stopped too. I don't know, and we had not discussed as a panel whether that should extend further downstream or not.
No, I'm not talking extending further. I'm talking about coming back toward the yellow area that you did address. At that particular point, will we be required, do you think, I'm looking for a definite answer, but will we be required to place any kind of notification to someone coming from the other direction that you have not stepped into this restricted, unsafe zone?
I think
I don't know that we'd be required to, but we probably will. And where is the question we don't have answered yet, but access points that we know exist, whether it's boat ramps or even if it's more of a rustic situation with kayakers or canoes can get in, we'll probably be putting signage in those places, but we still need to work through that.
And Kevin, that signage is part of what you mentioned, y'all are gonna be quantifying
Correct.
over the next 7 days.
Signs
Getting
and
rid of
buildings.
word.
Yes, sir.
So I think you have said this, but I just want to clarify it in my mind. The group works together, there's no dissenting opinions that are either not included in this report or unexpressed. There's a general consensus between all the members of the expert panel.
Yes, sir. It is a consensus report, and we hammered that home a number of times. And there, as I said, there were no raised voices, no slamming fists. It was a very collaborative effort with contributions from each member.
Well, I will tell you, my perception is you've done an exceptional job in a very short period of time. And I congratulate and thank you for your efforts, as well as the other members.
I'll pass that on to the other members as well. Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you very much.
And that's all I had on that item, Mr. Chairman. Like I mentioned, we'll address the ordinance later on in the agenda to conform with the expert report and also choose. And then on item 7, GM reports, we do have a few reports to give to y'all. First up is Charlie.
Morning, Mr. Chairman, board members. Earlier this month, when I was looking through our projects list, I was looking and seeing that we have right now, I guess, 45 projects between our developer-driven projects and our GBRA infrastructure projects that are in the design phase, and about the same number in construction. We're tracking with the staff of 12. So with that in mind, I'm happy for our first order of business to introduce you to our new staff member. We've hired a new engineer. I believe many of you may know him, Mr. Brian Perkins. He's probably been working on GBRA projects for the majority, if not all, of his career as an engineer on the consulting side. We're happy to bring him over to help us push through some of those projects. So I'll turn it over to Brian.
Hi, welcome. Hi, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to join the team at GBRA and help the engineering team out with some implementation of projects through. And some, as Charlie mentioned, I've worked with HDR for 17 years, and then I was my research thing with Black & Beach for 4. And I know some of you very well, and I've met some of the others, and I look forward to meeting more soon. Thanks.
Welcome.
Welcome aboard, Brian.
Thank you.
So I'll briefly touch on just a few of our ongoing projects, and if y'all have any questions about the ones we don't cover that are in the workbook, we're happy to address those questions as well. But I'll start off with our Carrizo groundwater supply project and just hit some of the major milestones we've accomplished since our last report. The Gonzales County Groundwater District has approved our amended groundwater permit that allows us to consolidate our well field, which gives us significant project savings. We've also obtained cultural and environmental clearance for all of the piping that's associated with that well field, all the way to the shared water treatment plant with Alliance, which helps us set the routes. And then we've received our 30% design package for both the drilling of the wells and for all of those pipelines and pumping systems that's currently in review. And we'll be having a workshop later this month with the consultant to provide our input on that submittal. Some of the ongoing activities with the project, we participate in a monthly project advisory committee comprised of our staff and Alliance's staff, or the Alliance customers, rather. And we review all of the status of the projects and talk about different project considerations for all of the shared infrastructure that's shown along those routes in red in the map. Some of the activities that we've accomplished is we've talked through some of the control narratives for the project, or who's going to have capabilities to operate what facilities remotely through our respective SCADA systems, and what redundancy will we build into those monitoring and controls capabilities. We've talked through some construction guidelines for different construction materials and design considerations associated with the project that will be provided to the, there's multiple different consultants that are designing the project elements, and so they have a defined set of criteria to start the basis of their design from. We're also right now working through some potential additional cost-saving measures on top of the costs we're already saving by partnering with Alliance, and that'll be the topic of our meeting coming up this month. So just kind of a general schedule for that project. On the left, some of the elements of the project that GBRA is managing under our own design contracts. Coming up March of this next year, we expect to complete the well drilling package design phase. And that will move into construction in the second half of the year. We'll be drilling those 7 wells and accomplishing that part of the project. Once we get that done, they'll allow us to provide some water quality data to help with the water treatment plant design that's being managed by the Alliance team. In September of next year, we should have all of these surface facilities, pumping systems at final design. And that would allow us to potentially accomplish that construction as soon as March of 2021, although we have received Guadalupe Valley Electric's co-op's schedule for providing power out there, which is not until year 2022, so now we're discussing how we can maybe make those 2 schedules better aligned. But we do have some flow in the schedule to allow us to accomplish that work. And then you see the Alliance schedule on the right. What that generally shows is every piece of the project they're doing, whether it's pipeline design, water treatment plant, or booster pump stations, they expect to have their design phase wrapping up early 2021 in general to allow all of those elements to come online by 2023, which is the contractual deadline to start delivering water to both ours and their customers. And the water treatment plant is on the critical path and is expected to be the last thing to come online. Another project that engineering's been actively engaged in the past few months is we're calling it now the Stein Falls Water Reclamation Facility. This is a facility that was formerly known as Dunlap, but we have submitted a name change to TCEQ just last week, just because we've realized that we have a significant numbers of facilities named Dunlap, and it's causing some confusion and discussions with landowners and customers, so we've elected to change the name of that facility. But we've talked before about, you see it's south of New Braunfels and west of the Guadalupe River, in between New Braunfels and Seguin, which is a corridor that's rapidly growing and a lot of interest from developers. So we've got a significant amount of collection system improvements that we scoped through a master plan that we're currently designing. The goal right now is to have those projects complete and online by 2021 to allow us to open up for additional service in that area. And we had a lot of challenges securing right of entry just to get out and survey this project, and we discussed last month, I believe, a temporary restraining order to allow us to access some of these properties. I'm happy to report that through Teresa Van Buven's efforts, we did not have to issue a single temporary restraining order. We were finally able to come to terms with all of the landowners and get onto the properties without having to go through that process. So all the surveys wrapping up, and we expect to receive our 60% design submittal for that project next month. And I also want to thank Ashley Freiberg and Travis Basham on our staff for keeping the engineering design moving while we dealt with those challenges. The Dunlap Dam spillgate replacement project is still on track with the aggressive schedule we've laid out. You see some renderings of the hydraulic systems that have been developed for that project and kind of what the dam's going to look like with the access bridge that will go across the top. But we have a workshop scheduled with Black & Veatch, our design consultant, for the end of this month to review that 30% design package and provide our input on that. So we're still moving forward with that as well. Talking about some projects that are reaching the closeout phase of the finish line. We've got, if you recall, we've been working for quite some time on a project to address disinfection byproduct removal in our Western Canyon water treatment plant. We're now in the contractors addressing some final punch list items needed to close that project out. The Cordillera Ranch to Bernie ISD pipeline, also in our Western Canyon system, was online in time for the school to open up, and we're addressing some punch list items to close that out as well. We completed the installation of a new pump station to get water to our regional raw water system that delivers water to the San Marcos water treatment plant. And we've got another item to discuss that in more detail. We have officially terminated the contract for the spillgate repairs that were going on due to safety concerns raised by us and the contractor following the Dunlap spillgate replacement. So we're getting through close out of that contract. And some of y'all that have been on the board for several years may recall that for the past 8 years, GBRA has been working with the Army Corps of Engineers, providing input on a feasibility study that looked at different flood mitigation projects for the basin. They finally reached the end of that effort and have determined that there's not a single project in the basin that meets the criteria for federal funding, but we were able to identify several different flood mitigation strategies for 14 communities in the basin that participated in the study, and I think that's going to be great information for the new state flood plan that will be coordinated through the Texas Water Development Board. So that'll provide great input into that process. And of course, you can't complete projects without some new ones showing up. So a few projects that we've just kicked off, again in our Western Canyon system, with all of the new development out in Cordillera and the Bernie ISD pipeline coming online, we have a need to increase capacity of one of our booster stations on the Western Canyon transmission line, so we kicked off design of that. We're also upgrading another lift station in the Stein Falls system. Our goal is to try to have that online in advance of the improvements that I outlaid that are going to be online in 2021, so we can open up certain areas of the system to service sooner than the deadline of that project. And also, we have a new regional plant for wastewater that we're evaluating. We kind of did some very cursory preliminary engineering to look at how the Bernie and Fair Oaks areas could be served, and now we've entered into agreements with those communities that are launching into a more detailed engineering study to define those project costs and push that project forward. Speaking of new beginnings, I wanted to show you all Amy Uniac, our staff engineer, is welcomed a new addition to her family. She's there with her husband Eric and her new daughter Madeline Grace. And so if you get a chance to see Amy, be sure to congratulate her and tell her we're happy to have her back at work as well. So with that, I'll address any questions you have.
Any questions?
Yes, with regard to Alliance, which is, I kind of run into those people pretty regularly, would it be appropriate for me to be very positive about the progress that we perceive that they're making with regard to our partnership?
Absolutely. I mean, if you look at the schedule they've laid out, they've made significant efforts to stay on track with that schedule, and we've been really actively coordinating how they can take on different pieces of the project, like right-of-way acquisition that benefit us both. And we're still looking at some additional shared pipeline corridors that were not even initially discussed. So there's just, on all levels, I think they're really pushing the project. Their design team's doing a great job, and we're happy with the progress they're making and the collaboration that we have.
That's great to hear, because we're only saving $50 or $60 million.
Any other questions or comments?
Status of the equipment that was purchased from North Texas to take to Guadalupe-Blanco, is the project still on track to completion?
Correct. We've engaged our consulting engineer to provide the calculations that we'll need to have at TCQ, and our operations staff have been coordinating getting that facility down there for our staff to make some of the upgrades to that plant. So that project is progressing as well. And that's one that we have Amy helping us ramrod through now that she's back in the office.
Charlie, thank you so much. You played a really good role in the technology.
Thank you.
Next, we have Nathan Prince.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. There has been a lot going on with my team and my division since mid-summer or so, which is the last time that I've given an update to the board. So I've got quite a bit this morning, but I'm going to run through it really fast. So if anyone has a question about something and I don't spend enough time on it, please stop me. I'll be glad to give a little more information. I'm going to start with the Water-Oriented Recreation District of Comal County is an entity up in Comal County that manages recreation on the Guadalupe River and Canyon Lake. They have a couple of marine enforcement patrol boats on Canyon Lake that they use for their normal business, but because of the time of year and the season, they don't have a big demand for those boats right now. So we were able to work out a memorandum of understanding with WERD. Essentially, they're going to let us use their enforcement boat on the hydro lakes to enforce the ordinances in the restricted and prohibited zones that we have. The Sheriff's Department will actually be using the boat. We're just providing it to them. Great example of a partnership between local governmental entities getting the job done. They were very willing to work with us. Jeff McKee and his group have this boat here at GBRA now. They're working on some decals to get it labeled appropriately for GBRA. and it should be ready for use here in the next few days. Some science stuff. Maybe. There we go. Wanted to remind the board that we have several species of freshwater mussels in the Guadalupe River that are on the candidate list for endangered protection under the Endangered Species Act. We expect to hear from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service this fall, so anytime within the next month or so on their decision of whether to list these species or not. We are obviously watching this very closely and working with U.S. Fish as they go through this process. There was a fourth species, and I'll bring this one up because I want to point out to the board this is how the process is supposed to work. U.S. Fish went through its process and came to the determination this species did not merit listing under the Endangered Species Act, and this was a species that was in the Guadalupe River. Had no idea what to predict on the other species, but this is how the process works, and they come out with a determination either it is or it is not listed. Sorry, it's not cooperating. Perfect. Wanted to let the board know that we worked with Texas Parks and Wildlife and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service after Lake Dunlap spillgate failure. We went out to do a mussel survey on the lake. We found what we expected to find, so the species we thought we would see were there. They were in good abundance, showing that the lake had had a very healthy mussel population in it. And just as importantly, we did not find anything that we didn't expect to find, so no curveballs or no surprises while we were out there. One thing I thought worth pointing out to the board in these pictures, that bottom picture on the left there of just the big shell, you can see a little something in the middle of that shell, and that is a zebra mussel. Zebra mussels are very much known to attach to native mussel shells. They're not in the abundance right now, but when zebra mussels get thicker, they can suffocate the native mussels and the native populations. So while zebra mussels can present some water supply and infrastructure challenges, they also present environmental issues, and that is something that we're going to have to very closely watch and keep up with. In that vein, we have deployed zebra mussel samplers up and down the Guadalupe River Basin. Most recently, we deployed them in the lower basin. We have been checking those samplers, and to date, we have not found any zebra mussels in the lower basin. We continue to work on non-native vegetations and spraying of obnoxious and nuisance vegetations. We've done that several times this year already. And just thought I'd mention, I saw a picture this morning come through my email of Swings Bayou down on the coastal area. And if you didn't know it was a bayou, you wouldn't know there was water there because the water hyacinth are that thick in that area. So I would imagine we'll be doing some more spraying to round out this year. I have a slide up here about some stuff we're working on with Texas Parks and Wildlife Department, but on the bigger picture, I want to point out to the board, Texas Parks and Wildlife Department, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, other river authorities. Since I've been here over the last year, we have been working with and collaborating with those environmental agencies and entities on a regular basis. A lot of it doesn't ever take the form of a contract or of an MOU or of a specific project. It's just more engagement in working with their staffs on a regular basis. And so while these are some specific things we're working on, I want to make sure the board understood the bigger idea that we are working with these agencies and entities. They're considering us a partner on a lot of things now, and they're reaching out to us, which is great. So we're kept in the loop on things that are going on, what to expect, and we're able to give them input as well. And a lot of times they listen to it, a few times they don't. So a few things with Parks and Wildlife. In the event that we had gone through with the lowering of the spill gates at the other hydro lakes, we were working with Texas Parks and Wildlife Department on an aquatic resource relocation plan. Essentially, that plan would have been designed to minimize the environmental impacts of lowering those spill gates. We still have that plan sitting on a shelf now. Did that with Parks and Wildlife with their approval, and so if we ever needed it, we do have that plan. We do all sorts of outreach with them. One good thing that I think has come over the last year is Parks and Wildlife goes out and samples our lakes and or our bays and parts of the river on a regular basis. They typically just go do that. We are now getting phone calls with them that are inviting us to go along with them and work with them and see what they're doing and understand it firsthand. And that's really a big step. Some other things we're working on, some mussel stuff, some conservation areas, and we are working with them on zebra mussels and non-native vegetation as well. Next update, I'll try and talk about some of the stuff we're doing with U.S. Fish or other river authorities just to kind of round that out. Didn't want the board to forget that I am working on a habitat conservation plan. So since May, when the board approved a resolution to work on that and support a habitat conservation plan, I have been working on securing funding and getting some of the initial planning pieces in place. One of the things that I wanted to make sure to point out, under applied for funding heading there, the Section 6 grant, that is $1 million grant over 3 years. Should hear about that any day from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service or Department of Interior, whether or not we were awarded that grant. I actually have a call with them this afternoon where I don't expect them to tell me whether we got it or not, but I will get an update of the timing of the process. And so very hopeful about that one. We are very competitive in that area. Also wanted to mention to the board, when I spoke to you in May, I gave a little timeline, talking about how fast or how slow I thought this might go. And I think we're still on target for getting out an RFP, and a request for proposals, this fall or at the latest early spring. We'd be looking to secure a contractor to help us go through that planning process for a habitat conservation plan. So I told the board in the beginning it didn't go real fast, but we were going to be aggressive and work at it, and just want you to know those pieces are falling into place and we are following through with that. Since midsummer, we have been all over the Guadalupe River Basin, participating in community events, sponsoring community events, and I wanted to run through a list of those real quick with you. So I'm going to go through this very fast. But as always, every year we sponsor the Texas Water Safari. It was a great success again this year. I have to see that top picture there and just think that's what I would look like if I ever did that race as well. If I made it to the end, which is doubtful. Yeah, mile 3, thank you.
I think that's the way the guy looked at the starting line.
Yeah. Okay, I can think about 100 jokes, but I'm going to keep moving here. Warriors Weekend, that is down on the coast. That is either current military or veterans, and they are paired with fishing guides from the coast who take them out. It is a great event. We have always had some GBRA staff that participated, but for the first time this year, we actually sponsored that event along with sending some staff to help them participate. It's a very great event. If you're there, it'll touch your heart. Let me just put it that way. We were the Refugio Chamber, or member of the Chamber of Commerce for June. Great honor that we received there, and Anna's very active in that community working with them. And so just wanted to make sure everyone knew that we received that honor. We sponsored the Ty Preston Memorial Library fundraiser, which is what this is out at Canyon Lake. The monies there are generally going to help to go to education programs that they hold there at the library. We also sponsored the chamber mixer for the Canyon Lake area back in late summer. Just want to point out, those are really good ways to get out in the community, get known, let our efforts be known, and talk to folks, citizens, constituents from the community. They're really valuable to some of our team with figuring out what's going on in the community and what's going on behind the scenes. I think we've mentioned this before, but we did sponsor the reopening of the Canyon Lake Dam walkway. That was a great success. Rusty, you were there, sir, and spoke at that. It was very much appreciated what we did there. And I haven't had a chance, I don't think, to say this, but I want to point it out. To me, this project really memorializes the way that we should all work together. We had a county commissioner that organized it. We had the high school welding team that worked on the gate, 2 different governmental entities that helped sponsor the work that went on there with funding, and then you had the Corps of Engineers who brought manual labor out to help implement some of it. You had numerous organizations, some governmental, some non-governmental, working together to get this done. And I wish every project worked like this in our communities. Last weekend, I had the pleasure of attending for the second time myself, but the Gorge Preservation Society Moonlight in the Gorge Gala. As always, this is a wonderful event. It's a great fundraiser for GPS. This is where they get a majority of their operating funds for the year, so the fact that we can help them with that, and then they reciprocate the help in the Gorge with volunteers helping us. Great partnership between us and the GPS. We've done another river cleanup over the summer, and we have some more scheduled, so we continue to work on river cleanups. We hosted the Seguin Area Youth Leadership Academy here at GBRA, and our education folks and community folks were involved in that. The Texas Lineman's Rodeo out at Nolte Park was sponsored and participated in that. And then the last thing I wanted to mention, for the first time, we participated in the U.S. Water Alliance's One Water Summit. That was in Austin this year. It was a great conference. We did sponsor pieces of it, and so we got the opportunity, or I did, to speak in front of the group and let them know about some of the great environmental work GBRA has been doing over the last 20 years or so. So great crowd, people from all over the nation there, and we were able to get some of the good word about GBRA out and learned a lot as well from folks around the nation, so it was a really good conference. And that is all I have. I'll be glad to answer any questions or more detail on anything I went through quickly.
Questions, comments?
You're very busy, good job.
Yes, sir, thank you.
The final report will be from Vanessa.
Morning, Chairman and Directors. It's been a while since I've had the opportunity to update you on projects our administration team has either they're ongoing or completed. First, I'd like to comment that agenda item number 18 and discussion item number 24 is related to GIS. So I'd like to commit the majority of my time to Misty Downey, who is our GIS administrator. She'd like to explain the functionality of GIS and how her role positively impacts GBRA. Okay. So I'll go through this quickly. Over the summer, our education team worked with Hamline University to update our Waters to the Sea program. I think Cindy mentioned that to y'all when she was up here. What that program is, it's a middle school program that is online, so we're able to bring the outdoors indoors. Classroom time is precious, and to most educators, anytime we're able to do that, it's very much appreciated. While that's coming up on my slide, there was a map of the United States. Over the summer, it's really amazing that we had over 2,000 hits to, or page views to our education to these modules. These modules prove that as we're updating them, that it is most definitely used throughout the community. So when I mean bringing the outdoors indoors, if you click on, this would be like if you were out sampling, you would click on a vial, and it would tell you here what the oxygen, phosphates, temp, turbidity, and pH would be, and then what macroinvertebrates live in that environment. So that is the mayfly larvae, and it'll give you a brief description. I don't want to spend too much time on it, but it's a great program, and we look forward to rolling that out. The map that I was speaking about was here. The majority does come from our region, but we did have we have folks from all over the country here in these areas that look at our programs. It's various types of programs, our education programs, septic tank, wastewater, so we're really proud. When they're not developing curriculum, they also host professional development trainings for various ISDs. Here are some photos. I think this is the battery. Okay, summer professional development. A few photos of Cindy and some ISDs there. Moving on to human resources, we do have a new staff member, Christopher Payne. He has been with GBRA for the past 6 months, but recently has come to our HR team. Christopher, what do you want? I know he's here. Christopher has a bachelor's degree in business administration and marketing. I just wanted you to meet him.
Good morning. Good morning. Before GBRA, I was working for the college in Austin. I was there for 9 years. I've been with GBRA going on 7 months. I had the pleasure of working under Nathan Pence. He taught me a lot about the environmental side. I look forward to learning human resources.
Great. Welcome aboard.
Yikes, I stole him.
Is that an example of the way you like departments to work?
I think I better say yes.
Collaboration.
Collaboration.
As early as last week in human resources, we coordinated and conducted an all-staff training The first half of that training was supervisors, where they went through an employment law, covered lawful and mindful management tips. The afternoon was the all-staff training, and we did a sexual harassment, procurement, public information, and for the first time to GBRA, we brought an active shooter training. Benefit renewal, at this time of year, we go through our benefit renewal process where we analyze cost, utilization, and search for enriched benefits. I'm pleased and happy to announce that UHC, United Healthcare, has delivered a no rate increase for calendar year 20.
Very good.
With the rising cost of healthcare, that is mostly welcomed in our environment. We have also, at minimal or no cost, been able to enrich our vision and EAP program, with mental wellness being a forefront in most organizations. GBRA should be no different. With that enriched EAP time, we'll be able to offer 24-hour counseling care, as well as there's 140 providers within our 10-county district that folks would be able to see up to 6 times if they were going through a rough and difficult time. So I'm pleased to announce that as well.
Vanessa,
Yes.
I apologize. What is EAP?
Employee Assistance Program.
Okay.
Moving on, and speaking of wellness, recently our HR department administered an employee engagement survey. This is an anonymous survey where we ask questions like, are you satisfied for opportunities of training and professional growth? Are you satisfied with our healthcare benefit related programs? How would you like to be recognized? We are hoping that we have about 75% participation. It runs to the end of the month. I look forward to sharing some of those ideas and what's with you. Okay. Moving on to communication. In the last quarter, we've spent the majority of our time speaking to residents and numerous reporters from various media outlets. Something that has really helped in aid in that communication to interested parties has been gblegs.com. As you can see here, there's been over 10,000 viewers from August to October. Now, what this analytics tells us is that users, there's 10,000 views, but 4,000 users, that they're actually coming back for information. So we try to update GB Lakes. I know that the person that was up here mentioned that some of that information was on GB Lakes. So as soon as information becomes available, we do update that. We frequently ask questions, as we did yesterday, related to that issue. As our current website, our overall design, we are completed with the design phase, and we are currently coding and consolidating our current website. Oops. Information technology, I gotta go back to my slide here. We have had several media updates to this room where we're able to, we've been live streaming the board meetings. This is the first time we've ever done that for folks who are unable to attend. We've improved the quality, the sound, so if you are projecting out in the lobby or if folks are at home, they're able to hear as if they were sitting here. Our voice over IP installation has been complete, as Lee mentioned to you. It did come at a cheaper cost to GBRA, and also it is an updated phone system. We also implemented a standardized email signature. So when we email you, you notice everyone's signature is the same, it's interactive. If you click on our logo, it takes you to our website. If you click on any of the social media icons at the bottom, it will take you to those social media handles. So if you don't have any questions, do you have any questions for me?
Questions, comments? Also, comment. And everybody, I think, is aware of that we've gone through a reorganization process within the Guadalupe-Blanco River Trust, bring us in compliance with the sunset recommendation, and you and your department were more than helpful in getting all that done. Thank you.
Oscar. Thank you, Oscar. May I answer any questions?
Good job. Thank you.
Great, I'm gonna have Misty come up with her videos. Thank you.
Sure.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning.
I'm Misty Downing. I'm the JS Administrator here at GBRA. I've been here 9 months as of yesterday, so So we've been pretty busy. I'm going to give you just a taste, not take up too much of your time, just go over what GIS is and how we've been using it. And like Vanessa mentioned, it's related to a couple other related agenda items, so hopefully this will help. In fact, what Vanessa pulled up, the Waters to the Sea, that is a GIS application. It's a story map, and you'll see something similar that we have internally. So just to review, GIS is Geographic Information Systems. It basically is location intelligence. So it takes your data and it puts it on a map, either through coordinates or a place. We talk about data layers a lot in GIS. It can be hard for me not to use mouse. So we tend to have an aerial or something familiar, like a street space map that you look at, and then overlay different data on top of it. So land uses, elevation, your topography, the property boundaries is really popular GIS data, infrastructure, which is what we do here, our collection systems, distribution systems, and then facilities or customers would be like water meters. All of that data is kind of layered on the map, and I'll show you some examples. So GIS encompasses everything more than just software and data. It's the people, it's the processes, it's the methods, it's analysis, and these days it's a lot about visualization and communication, and using this data to tell a story or to help make decisions. So in June, we were able to acquire enterprise GIS software. What that means is it allows us to provide GIS to the entire agency. We're focusing on being web-based, so people aren't kind of stuck at their computer using desktop software. You can access this anywhere from any device. So what enterprise really means is we have a central database that I manage, so anytime we make updates there, it's everywhere for everyone to see instantly. We have a server that allows us to put our data out on the web where you can access it, not just from your computer. And then we have a GIS portal, which I'm going to show you an example of. That's basically the map platform that you would access either from a tablet or your phone or from your computer that lets you look at our specific maps. So WebGIS is the term for this ability to access the data anywhere. It's really important that GBRA is doing this. There's a lot of enthusiasm internally. Staff has wanted this for a long time. One of the reasons it's important is GIS is a system of record. So we have a ton of institutional knowledge in our staff that they know in their heads, but not everyone has access to. One of the goals of GIS is to try to get that digital so that everybody has that same information. It's also a system of engagement, like I said. It's very popular for visualizing and communicating information. People can get bored with text or tables or charts, but maps are interactive and very engaging. And then it's a system of insight. You'd be very amazed what you can learn when you plot out information on a map versus in the table. You see different patterns, you see different things emerging, and so the analytics are very powerful. So this is actually our internal GIS portal. This is what we've set up since the summer. There are several web applications that are in the process of being developed, and several more of them that you don't see here. I'm going to go into the system formerly known as Dunlap, the Steinfalls viewer, and show you some examples of that. But engineering has their own application. I'm setting up a network viewer for Jim for our SCADA system. And I'll take you and show you really quickly the operations atlas because it kind of touches on everyone. And hopefully I won't get stuck where my slides don't advance like everyone's been experiencing. There we go. So this is kind of like the Waters to the Sea that Vanessa just showed you. It's a true atlas. It's a collection of thematic maps. So at the top you'll see we have kind of this overview map, which is what we're looking at. This is all our facilities and some of our major pipelines. And then each division has their own tab where you can go in and it's more specifically their data and things relevant to what they do. So we have all of our divisions up there. I'm going to take us into rural utilities because I want to show the Dunlap, which will be the Steinfalls viewer specifically. And all of these are interactive, so you basically click on things to jump around to different sections. So this is the Dunlap viewer. It's probably our most popular viewer. In fact, it is our most popular viewer. It's used by engineering. It has the data that Charlie was showing earlier, where they're planning for those capital improvement projects. But it's also used by operations for existing systems. So you'll see there's a lot of data in here. There's a longer list of data that you can turn off and on. But it has our existing collection systems, as well as existing developments and proposed developments. There's a lot that you can do with these tools, way too much for me to go over and probably not interesting maybe to everyone but me. But I wanted to show you just a couple things of what it does. For one thing, the spatial data is what you see on the map. So these are the gravity mains in the Steinfall system. You also have access to all of the tabular data as well, though. So GIS is both together. It's that visual, spatial, and then it's also tabular, which can be powerful and useful. Another thing is we zoom in, which normally it wouldn't be so quick. Yeah, sorry about that and dramatic, but this is the Fellers subdivision within the Steinfall system. When you click on a feature, like if you were to click on a manhole here, these pop-ups come up. This is what's in the table. This is what we call attribute information. This is useful for engineers, for our staff out in the field. They already are using this on their phones or on a tablet. So you get all of this data, and I can also attach documents to this. So in this example, there's an as-built plan attached, where in the field they can pull up that document and look at that information. I can also attach easement documents or permits or whatever else might be relevant that we need to access the data. So that's kind of how it's functioning as that system of record. Another way that we use GIS, and I'm going to give one more example about this, is you can use it for field data collection. So Jeff and his team have gone out with their phones, and they're able to take a point for the cleanouts in the same Feller subdivision, and they collect this data. So they fill out the form with all this information, and they can actually take pictures. This is a picture Jeff took of a cleanout. So they can perform inspections and sort of track assets. It's also how we're going to collect a lot of our asset inventory, which I'll talk about more later, like right now. So GIS is important. I think we brought it online now because we're launching our asset management program, and linear assets are a key component of that. The linear assets are what I was just showing you. It's our systems, the water transmission and distribution, it's the lines and the valves, the wastewater collection systems with those mains and manholes, our electric transmission system, the canal system down in Calhoun County. All of that are linear assets. And so whatever software we use for our asset management is going to pull in the GIS data the same as my GIS maps and make that accessible to our operations staff. We have a lot of work to do with collecting and creating this GIS data. I showed you an example of what's sort of farther along. Not all of our systems are fully built out where you have all of that data available, and I'll be talking about that a little bit more later. So my other big example is the field data collection, because this is very fun, and we've been making good use of it, Jeff McKee and his team in particular. So we have an app for the phone called Collector. It can be used on a phone or on a tablet. And what it allows is for people to go out in the field, stand at whatever asset they're interested in collecting, take a point, fill out a form, take a picture. And so we've been using this. This is Russell, one of the hydro staff, taking points at the electric poles. He did electric pole inspections. So you can see he's taking the point, he's taking pictures of different elements of the asset. And there's one more, if we get the other picture. And then taking pictures of the cross arms, because that's part of the checklist that he's actually going through. I should have brought water up here with me. So this is what it looks like when you're back at the office. So this is all happening in real time. As he's out there collecting these points, Jeff can be sitting in the office and they'll start to appear on the map for him. I know this is hard to see, I just wanted to show, because this is the extent of all the electric transmission systems that they've already collected data. And so if we zoom in a little closer, where here we are at Lake Placid and going down to Nolte, each point is one of those poles that he went and stood at and filled out the form and collected that data. And so you can see the data here now, both this way and tabular, of all the information that was collected. So it's a pretty cool system. These are the pictures that he was just taking. This is also in the system. You can see I'm on a web browser just sitting at my desk. And we've got the pictures he took, the cross-on pictures that reflect the condition that he coded into the application. He had made a comment about the trees needing to be trimmed in the right-of-way, and you can see the picture of that. And one of the best parts is all of this can be exported just as an Excel table, so Jeff can go and use this to prioritize the work, get cost estimates to Victor. It really just creates all of these efficiencies in the workflow. So that's literally just a taste of what GIS can do and what we're doing with GIS. Are there any questions? Yes.
This system, do you incorporate all the LiDAR map that we did, that LiDAR data, I guess, you all utilize that?
We're not utilizing it yet, but we have a lot of plans. Charlie and I have some big dreams on what we want to do with 3D analysis and what we want to do with the LiDAR. So we will be using it. It's incredibly valuable data to have for the whole basin.
Now, in Concrete Conservation District, well, the software you utilize it will blow your mind.
It will, and I'm excited to, hopefully someday I'll be showing you these in 3D, and that's what LiDAR allows you to do, and it will be super cool.
As you get your information, it's going to be chronologically ordered and things like that, so you can go back and look at pictures from the past as well as currently. That it'll be easily accessible.
Yes, that's correct. I don't think you could see the whole table, but there's a time signature, and it actually records who did the editing, so you can track the user and the time for everything that you create.
So Misty, with this, you'd also be able to integrate the meteorological data and the steady flow numbers. And Charlie had presented something just about a year and a half, so well, maybe 2 years ago, just a GIS-style analysis of the runoff in the Blanco watershed that we had a big flood. So this is something that could also ultimately become a predictive tool by integrating that in real time.
We definitely like to. Real-time integration can be challenging, but we have already, Carl and I worked to redevelop the rainfall map that's on our website to be using ArcGIS in the same system. And so it's definitely capable of it.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Surely you have a passion for that. We appreciate it.
I do. I love it.
Good.
All right, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Misty.
Let's see, it's 11:15, 11:17, and we have about 16 action motions, I think, that I am going to recess until 11:30, so that you can stretch your legs, and we'll reconvene at 11:30. Bringing us back in to open session, and we'll begin with action items. Action item number 8, consideration of possible action authorizing the general manager to negotiate and execute a wastewater service agreement between Guadalupe-Blanco River Authority and Richard Stream Limited Partnership related to the Rogues track. And I believe you need to recuse yourself. All right.
Mr. Chairman, action item 8 is on page 108 of the board package. I do have a list of agreements very similar to this action item before you today. As you read, it is a new wastewater service agreement within our Dunlap wastewater reclamation system that Misty and Charlie have changed the name to Sky Falls. But you see, over the last year and a half, the board has approved 7 essentially identical or very, very similar agreements in this service area for 740 LUEs, which is 740 homes. The action item before you today is for what we call the bogus tract, and that will be for 353 homes plus an amenity center, so 354 LUEs. This is one version of the mapping that Misty showed you just a bit earlier. So I use this, Misty's work, in visiting with developers that come in from time to time. I think, as Charlie said in his comments, the Braunfels is off the upper left of the map, Seguin McQueenie's off the lower right of the map. The river sits here just to kind of orient you. The green tracks are the developments that we are already serving. The pink tracks, and I think Misty's later version had a few more pink tracks, are those tracks that we've had inquiries about providing wastewater service to. The bogus track, the subject of the action today, is this one in blue. And you see the little bubble there. It's about 74 acres. Again, about 354 LUEs. That will generate, at today's connection fee level, board-approved connection fee amount, about $2.2 million in connection fee revenue, probably over the next 5 to 6 years. And that will be an important source of revenue to build and construct this infrastructure that Charlie showed out in this area, as really New Braunfels continues to expand south into this service area. So, Mr. Chairman, that was really all of my prepared comments. Be happy to answer any questions the board might have. But if there are no questions, the action before you, as you read, is consideration of and possible action authorizing the general manager, CEO, to negotiate and execute a wastewater service agreement between GBRA and the Richard Beach Family Limited Partnership related to that bogus tract.
Do I have a motion?
You do.
Second. Any discussion?
I'm recusing myself from this.
You're accusing yourself also?
Yes, sir.
All right, so Director Matthews and the rest, Director Blackman are recused from this motion. Are there any questions or comments? Call for the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? So that it passed.
Thank you.
Item number 9, consideration of the possible action authorizing the general manager, CEO, to negotiate and execute a contract to rehabilitate and chemical-resistant coating to the containment system at Western Canyon Water Treatment. Eric.
Good morning. I'd like to apologize for my sinus condition. You should have heard me before I went to doctor. And I have 3 items in a row, so if you can't hear me, I'll try to speak up. Just got a picture of kind of what we're talking about in your board packet. Goes over the details. We're looking at a chemical-resistant coating for some containment systems that are around bulk storage or process control storage at Western Canyon plant. Things that we have out there is 50% citric acid, or 25% caustic, and 10% sodium hypochlorite. We have some coagulants too that are non-corrosive on concrete, but we have a containment system around those. And caustic, citric acid is used for removing minerals from the membranes, and concrete is minerals. And it loves concrete, so if you have any little break in piping or anything, it etches that out and cuts channels into it. So we're looking at coating these containment systems. We have 5 containment systems. One of them we need to repair right now. We'll bid them independently and see how far our budget goes. We have some money in the budget already set aside for this. Generally, the more you do, the cheaper the price gets, and so we will play with that and see where we can get. There's multiple different coatings you can use, polyureas or different types of epoxies. we'll have a spec set where as long as they can meet the requirements that we can have multiple bidders on that project. So action requested is just authorize us to seek bids and approve the contract. Are there any questions?
Have a motion? So moved. Any questions or discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Next, consideration of and possible action authorizing the general manager, CEO to negotiate and execute an agreement to purchase a truck with associated sewer jetter system installed.
So a little bit of summary, this year in the budget, we added a few positions for installation system and pipeline maintenance crew. As GBRA has grown over the years from just being wholesale treatment to more distribution, with some of the systems we're acquiring, we're getting a whole lot more residential areas, and as you saw, the Stein Falls area, I think it's 8.5 more miles of gravity flow pipe than we're looking at right now too. But we need to be able to clean that pipe, evaluate it, and maintain it. Right now, currently, we don't have any equipment like this. In the past, we just haven't had it because we didn't need it. But things have changed. So to grow with how we're growing, requesting some equipment to maintain that system and clean it. Right now, currently, we have to call contractors. And contractors are not cheap. They don't have our same level of urgency, should I say. If we have a problem, they look at their schedule, and whenever they're available, they can kind of come in. So a lot of times we have trouble getting a response, and we're needing a response right now. If we have sort of backed up, we need to be rolling to get in. So this will provide us equipment. This is just an example of some of the equipment we're looking at. We've had demos, we're getting prices. We're even looking at demo equipment that they would bring out to show you. Sometimes it's got a few road miles, but it looks brand new and can save substantial money. So I'll actually get some prices on some of those items as well. So there would be a truck with the equipment mounted on it as well. If we can get the money to where we can get it right, we'll have a combination truck like that shows, a snorkel on the front as a vacuum, so we can actually vacuum stuff out, and the hose in the front is to line. It's a cleaner. Goes up to 1,000 foot. We don't normally go that far, we don't have that much capability. It can also be used for lift stations or for sewer spills or hydro excavation. To find a valve, if we can't find it, we can do it with pressure washer out in that, and it's a safe way to get your own power lines as well. So.
Okay, do I have a motion? Second. Motion and a second. Questions or discussion?
I have, David, I don't get those, you can find any of those leaks from
I've looked at leases. It's pretty expensive. Generally after about 18 months to 24 months to purchase it. A lot of these things will last 8 to 2 years. But they are available for short term. One like this is probably $6,500 to $8,000 a month. So we make a lot of payments for that. Well, we did look at the options.
Yeah, no, I'm not, and those types of animals out there like that, or, they're gonna ask a lot of money to do this.
Will it be shared up and down the system, or how is that going to work?
Initially, we're going to have one crew. Will be based at a centralized location. It will be used all over all of our areas that will be needed. We'll have a coordination point, supervisor. As needs arise, we will do that. We'll try to coordinate. We want to clean every inch of line that we have, categorize it. Condition assessment, which on our next item will cover how we're going to do that. To go into GIS, we want to confirm what our maps, we have a piece of paper that shows where it is. We're going to go out and visually confirm what we have and maintain that. But it'll be used long term. I think you'll see me back here again requesting more equipment and more people as we continue to grow. But this is our first expansion like this.
It's all day, we recommend Florida to operate with a different workforce?
No. No. We are interviewing right now for positions. It'll be 4 people on the crew initially.
Go ahead.
We'll have to have a conversation later.
It's color there, folks.
Wake everybody up.
Okay. Seeing no other questions, I'll call for the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Last item, I'm glad Kristen got up here first to talk about GIS. So this is part of what this system will do to incorporate into her system. She clicked on an asset, which was a manhole or a pipeline, and she pulled up as-built plans, she pulled up easements, she pulled up some other information. So what we're requesting here is to get a camera system that we can video the lines. With this camera system, we can video the lines. It's got a little crawler, is what we call that goes in the lines. There's different size wheels, pan and tilt camera. We can go up the lines. It measures footage. It measures the grade, so it's got an inclinometer. So for engineering, we can go in and verify grades on the slope if we have high spots or low spots. We can take still pictures. As we go up to a point, so we get to a tap, we're looking for taps where the houses tie in. So we can go up and say 120 foot, and it'll tell us I can turn and take a picture of that tap. And then with condition assessment software, our crews in the field will be able to say, yes, this is in good condition. No, it has cracks, it has roots, it has intrusions, it has whatever. There's a list of things on a national standard. And so we will actually evaluate and do a condition assessment at that point, log it in, and then continue on. So I have a continuous run video plus individual snapshots with data. So later, the guys in the field will have a tablet, and they can walk out there in the middle of the night, and somebody's saying, my sewer stopped up, I need to find this. They can pull up on a tablet, they can look for a clean out, they can look down and see if there's any problems, they can review the video, and they can know, okay, if I need to find this from manhole ABC 123 or whatever the number is, 120 foot on the right-hand side going upstream, that's where it is. Right now, we have a piece of paper, hopefully, if you have it with you. This will be available to anybody with that in the field. You can go out there and emergency response. It'll also help us with engineering. Once we evaluate some of the older systems, we're going to find issues that we don't know we have. We don't know we have. Once we find those, we can actually go in and start putting together capital projects or emergency point repairs or whatever is appropriate for that situation. This particular camera here, the vendor showed a technology that you can do a point repair on a sewer line by pushing the sleeve up with ways, basically like a stent. You know how a stent works, they go in there and you blow it up, stainless steel with a rubber gasket. So if you have a hole knocked into it, you can push it up with the thing, video it, and drive the camera through it to do point repairs. I was excited to hear it was only $400. Because you can't roll that type of equipment out to even dig a hole up for $400 for points like that. So there's a lot of new technology coming out there that we're doing at the same time.
All right.
Any questions?
So the motion is this: consideration of and possible action authorizing the general manager, CEO, to negotiate and execute an agreement to purchase a sewer main line inspection system. Do I have that as a motion? So moved.
Second.
We have a second. Any questions or discussion?
Should I come with mud grip tires?
They actually have all sorts of tires. They're making everything else, but yes,
This is used before and or after the jetter.
Jetter, you would always want to clean it first so you can don't get your camera hung up. So you want to clean it out that way. The nozzles that we will use are very specialized. They'll do a 360 cleaning and get all that debris out. We'll remove anything out of the lines. My joke is always Barbie dolls are our biggest problem. Barbie dolls don't float down the lines very good. Get keys and stuff like that that we can flush. So we'll remove that stuff out and then we come back pretty close. It'd be best in a few days or a few weeks to come back out and evaluate that.
So does it take specialized employee to run this thing, or?
If you can run an iPhone, you can run this. That's the controller right there. Most of it's touch screen. There's two little joysticks at the top. One's for the camera. The camera's actually steerable in a large enough path, but it's very simple. All the controllers, some of the different camera systems we looked at, we've got one more demo tomorrow, we have 4 so far, is the same controller that kids use on Xbox. So my guess is our employees will be a younger generation that are used to playing games, and we'll convince them that we'll let them play games all day long for a small donation.
What we will need to do, though, is provide training to our employees so that they understand the methods of evaluation. So there's a standard evaluation platform that is used when you're looking inside the line to determine what the condition of the line is, how big the brakes are, where they're located, things like that. And we want to be able to bring that, incorporate that into the GIS or asset management plan so that somebody in an engineering department or an engineering firm understands fully what our guys are seeing. So, like I said, we'll give you some training with those employees after we apply this equipment.
We've also asked Misty to be involved in the demos just for the computer part. Once we get the information, we have to be able to get it into her system as easily and seamlessly as possible to have as much double entry. And we don't want any information mixed up. So we're getting involved in that as well.
Is it tethered at all?
It's got cable on it. Different ones will have anywhere from Kevlar is probably the most common. Some have stainless steel on there with extreme pulling strength.
And what's the reach
On
their average?
Typically 1,000 foot is what they put in it. Manholes by design typically are 400 feet. Most of the time you won't drive it through one manhole to the next one. You'll go up one block at a time, but it does have that potential capability. The camera itself runs off of DC motors, electric motors that move back and forth. If you lose power for whatever reason, the motors lock open in neutral, so you can just pull it back by hand if you need to.
Read it in. Okay. Seeing no other questions, I'll call for the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay.
Thank you.
Number 12, consideration of possible action authorizing the general manager, CEO to negotiate and execute the grant contract, Clean Water Act, Section 319H. Grant surface water quality monitoring to support the implementation of the Geronimo and Alligator Creek Watershed Protection Plan with the Texas State Soil and Water Conservation Board as well.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning.
Just to orient you, the Geronimo and Alligator Creek watershed kind of starts up there in the Grumples. That's kind of right around Bucky's. That seems to be a point everyone knows. Moves south through to Seguin, and then Geronimo Creek does end up in the Guadalupe River here in Seguin. So this watershed has been designated as impaired for an elevated E. coli bacteria. It also shows concerns for certain nutrients. So this grant is to help do collection of water quality data to support that watershed protection plan. And watershed protection plans are proactive, voluntary strategies for protecting and improving water quality. So the EPA approved this watershed protection plan in 2012. This grant is a 3-year grant that will end in August of 2022. The total project cost is about $317,000. With this, we are required to match 40% of those costs, so that's about $127,000. That match comes from GBRA personnel time to administer this grant, to actually sample all of the locations, and then we also analyze the data and create a final report for that. We do also have annual Geronimo Creek cleanups that those volunteers go towards that match as well. 60% is about $190,000, and that money will cover the cost of analyzing all the samples, the supplies for monitoring that, and then we will also be purchasing one continuous monitoring probe with this grant. So the project tasks include routine monitoring, and that's done on a monthly basis. We also have monitoring that's targeted towards wet and dry weather conditions. We've got a couple of groundwater monitoring stations. And then we will also do an aquatic life monitoring event. And this is something where we go out and we shock fish and we ID them. We also look at those macroinvertebrates or the bugs that are in the water. We look for any native mussel populations that may be there. And then we also will do riparian transects along there. So all of these tasks help to implement that watershed protection plan. So why we do this sampling is it allows us to focus on the non-point source pollution that's coming into the watershed, which is obviously a little hard to pinpoint. And by analyzing the data and giving those final reports to the watershed coordinators, they're able to implement environmental strategies that have science that back those decisions up. So I'd be more than happy to take any questions at this time.
All right, do we have a motion?
Sorry.
Second.
Yes, sir.
Some discussion.
The same template that we use on Plum Creek, we use on this, right?
Yes, sir, and Plum Creek is actually our next one, so we'll move on to that.
Has there ever been any consideration to have a sampling station above 35?
Yes, sir, and these sampling stations that are shown here are just our monthly routine monitoring stations. We have about 18 targeted monitoring stations that aren't shown on this map, and so we do have sampling up there.
Any other questions or discussion? Hearing none, I'll call the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. It passes. All right, looks like you're up again. Consideration of and possible action authorizing the general manager, CPO, to negotiate and execute the grant contract clean water section 398. Sorry?
I'm sorry.
Oh, that's all right.
I just,
Water quality monitoring to support the implementation of the Plum Creek Watershed Protection Plan with the Texas State Soil and Water Conservation Board.
Okay, a lot of this is repeating, so let me just get you in the right place here. Plum Creek starts up by the Kyle Buda area, and it moves south through Lockhart and Luling, and it eventually ends in the San Marcos River south of Luling there. And this watershed has also been impaired for elevated E. coli bacteria and also shows concerns for multiple nutrients. So again, there was a watershed protection plan that was accepted by the EPA in 2008 for this watershed. And so we are looking at continuing to do this water quality data collection through this plan. And again, we're going to have routine monitoring that we do each month. We're going to have the targeted monitoring for those wet and dry weather. For the continuous probes, we're going to deploy those and we're going to look at 24-hour dissolved oxygen readings. We do also look at effluent from wastewater treatment plants in this. We do sample those monthly. And we also have a couple of spring flow monitoring stations in this one. And so the total project cost here are going to be about $573,000. Again, that matching funds of $229,000 are going to come from GBRA personnel time to administer the grant to actually sample all of these and for the supplies associated with it. So if you have any questions on this one, I'd be more than happy to answer.
Take the motion.
Move.
All right, discussion, questions?
Is there ever an end to the monitoring? Do you ever expect to have it cleaned up?
That would be our hope, yes. But because of all of the population growth that we're seeing in these areas, we are seeing the watershed coordinators are seeing that it's hard to keep up.
Is it getting worse?
There are some sites that are getting worse and there are some sites that are getting better. And so that is why we sample so many sites in the watershed, so we can kind of pinpoint areas that are doing better or worse and look to see what activities we can change to make it better.
Ron, one thing, this particular project, the treated effluent that's going into Plum Creek is just growing exponentially right on that floor. And so it's very imperative that we monitor that and try to keep it clean as possible.
The Plum Creek is effluent dominated. There are 18 discharges that go into this creek. It is, all of that is treated to the standards that TCEQ allows of their permit. But we do look at that going into the creek.
All right, call the question, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Thank you.
14, consideration of and possible action approving an amendment to the GBRA fiscal year 2020 work plan and budget to establish new base water rate for the Calhoun County rural water system to become effective January 1st, 2020, and increase the Water Resources Division legal fees account by $300,000. Mr. Stats.
Good morning, Chairman and board members. This particular action item and budget amendment includes two parts. One is the rural water rate, base rate increase that we talked about during the budget process. We have developed a communication that will go out to the customers of that system should you approve this item. It does increase by 31% from $48 to $63 per month, and the consumptive rates will remain the same. 97% of the customers are actually in that 5/8 inch meter, so they'll see that increase to $63. That is to pay for distribution system improvements and eventually new water treatment plant in that area. Part of that communications, customers will also indicate future rate increases as well. In addition to that, we're asking for a modification to the legal fees budget based on recent activities and making sure we have sufficient funds to cover legal costs that are coming to the rest of this fiscal year.
Have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Randy, do you feel comfortable with the $300,000 increase? Is that sufficient?
I think it's sufficient based on our current estimates, and we did increase it a little bit at the start of the budget year. Some of those legal fees are for water rights and other types of fees in addition to the lawsuit that we're dealing with currently. We'll certainly come back to you if there's a need to amend it as well.
All right, any other questions or comments? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, 15. Consideration of and possible action approving a resolution authorizing the issuance of $9,740,000 in the aggregate principal amount of Guadalupe-Blanco River Authority Contract Revenue Bond Series 2019A Low Interest Financing Carrizo Groundwater Supply Project, authorizing the sale thereof to the Texas Water Development Board through its State Water Implementation Fund for Texas program. Approving and authorizing the execution of a paying agent registrar agreement and an escrow agreement related to such bonds, authorizing the authority to obtain $30,260,000 of additional funds for the project pursuant to a previously approved master agreement between the authority and the Texas Water Development Board relating to the Texas Water Development Board A, providing up to $116,650,000 of additional financial assistance to the Texas Water Development Board's participation loan program under the SWIFT program, and B, receiving an ownership interest in GBRA's interest in the Carrizo Groundwater Supply Project for a period of time. Approving an amendment to the master agreement, approving and authorizing all other instruments and procedures related thereto, and providing for an immediate effective date.
Board members, you heard from Charlie earlier this morning where he talked about that project continuing to move forward. Initially, when this project was started over a year and a half ago, there was not a plan for a sale in 2019. It was only planned for 3 sales, one in 2018 that we closed on last year, and then not another one until 2020. But with the need to make sure we have sufficient cash flow for that project as it continues to move along, and also to take advantage of a very favorable bond market, wanted to take some action, and so we were asking for approval for $40 million. In conversations with Ann Berger Intrican, our financial advisor during the break, she mentioned that 17 trillion, debt outstanding globally is negative yielding debt. which is what has driven down the bond rates and made this such a favorable opportunity for us to move forward with this. So this is included in two components to it, the low interest and board participation. It's very similar to the funding that you approved at this time last year. And as well as Tom Spurgeon, our bond counsel, is here to answer any specific questions you have on the bond resolution or in the financing. But it's very similar to what you authorized at this time last year.
All right, have a motion? Move. Second, discussion, questions?
You know, $163 million, that doesn't sound much when you say it real fast.
It is a substantial project and really for something that's desperately needed with the rising population of this area.
You know, the 3 entities that got that water bill, it was a lot.
So congratulate you on that. Any other questions or discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you for your work on that. Okay, number 16, consideration of and possible action authorizing the general manager, CEO, to negotiate an executive agreement to purchase a patrol boat.
Good morning. With the new restricted and prohibited areas on the lakes, one of the crucial components is going to be enforcement. And in Nathan's presentation, he showed y'all the boat that we have on loan to us from Word that we're going to relabel and put out on Lake McQueen. We need one more boat on Meadow Lake here to make sure that enforcement can get to it quickly if there's any perpetrators out there. And our goal is just to get between an 18 and a 20-foot fiberglass center console boat that is small enough for this small lake, but is large enough to ensure the safety of the marine officers that are out there. So we're looking in the neighborhood of $40,000 for the purchase of that boat.
All right, have a motion?
Yeah, this is the one that we're gonna provide the boat and the county sheriff department.
Did we get a second?
Second.
Okay, discussion, go ahead.
As far as operating the boat, is this the one that the Guadalupe County Sheriff's Department will be operating?
Yes, sir. They will be operating the boat
They're the
all
law
day.
enforcement part of it.
Yes, sir.
What about the other ones?
There's, the Sheriff's Department has one boat that will be using on Lake Placid. The boat that Nathan showed y'all, it will be on Lake McQueen. And then this boat will be here for Meadow Lake.
Okay, so that involves.
We haven't gotten to that part. This one will also have a trailer, so it is portable if we need to move that.
Jeff, the question I asked earlier, does this boat have a pole for pulling skiers or barrels for holding fishing line?
Of course not, sir.
Good.
Or boombox speakers on either side.
That option has not been requested either.
Great answer.
I think it probably wouldn't be approved.
Yeah.
All right, I'll call the question, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Thank you.
Number 17, consideration of and possible action authorizing the general manager or CEO to negotiate and execute a contract for water meter replacement for the Calhoun County rural water system.
Mr. Chairman, board members, this is a project we've been talking about for quite a long time in the Calhoun County rural water system. I mean, it's to replace about 1,000 meters that we have down in the rural water system down in Calhoun County. And this is a picture of what a typical setup looks like in your water meter box. In case you don't look inside your box, that's what it looks like. You have the main cutoff, and then the water meter, and then you have the customer valve right here where the customer can turn that off. And one of the advantages that we would have with this system is a data logging capability. So we'll be able to, with these new meters, if there was ever any issue with a customer saying, there's no way I could have used that much water, we could actually go back and data log for 90 days. And this slide doesn't show it, but you can do it every 15 minutes and see when the irrigation system turned on, or when the leak started, and then when the leak was stopped. Another thing, another advantage of these new meters, and I put this slide in here for Misty. Hopefully it'll show. Not that one. Maybe my slide didn't get in there. But one of the things, another advantage is when we have a contractor go in and replace these meters, we will get a GIS location of every single one of the meters. And so we get that information over to Misty so she can provide us with a map, and we'll know exactly where that meter is. And down in Calhoun County and anywhere else, if you don't go to those meters very often, sometimes they get covered in grass and sand and dirt, and we'll be able to find the locations of these meters as part of that project of replacing the meters. And so, Mr. Chairman, the item before you is consideration of and possible action authorizing the general manager, CEO, to negotiate and execute a contract for water meter replacement for the Calhoun County rural water system. And I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Motion? Motion. Second? All right, questions, discussion?
Are they supposed to become more efficient, or how's it, what's the rationale for doing this?
Well, one of the reasons we want to do this is the older meters that we have are touch, so you have to actually walk up to them and touch them. This is a complete radio read system, which we put the radio in our trucks and we can drive by in a subdivision and just pick up the data. It's probably going to save us about 5 to 7 days of actually out there reading the meter. And a lot of times we have to go back when the meter reading doesn't look right. We have to go do a reread. It's just going to save us a tremendous amount of time.
Is that going to be reflected in the customer's rates then? If it's going to save y'all money?
Yes.
And
Director Mogul, if I may, we're currently spending not 7 days, but 21 man days to read meters. That's 3 guys, 1 week, to read meters. Under our current system, these meters were installed probably 92 or 93, 1992 or 93, the touch read system. The software that we're currently using is out of date. It's very difficult to support. This is a complete system that will allow us to interface more efficiently with our billing software that we use. Be considerable effort saved. Maybe probably will not be reflected in the decrease in the bill, but it will allow us to spend more time providing customer service and pipeline repairs and improving the efficiencies in the system overall.
which once again is not reflected in the customer's rate.
That's correct. We have a lot of additional repairs, improvements, capacity improvements that we need to be making out there, so the customer rate will not be affected.
The second question I had for you is you were talking about you were able to read these meters up to every 15 minutes. That's if somebody's on the block reading that meter, is that correct?
Yeah, so if there was an issue with that customer's meter, we would have to send somebody out and get close to it and read.
So you can't actually retroactively look and see what somebody's consumption was on this particular.
Yes, it'll data log for 90 days back.
But that's only if it's red, if you're on that block reading that meter.
Yes, yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So if you're not on the block reading that meter every day, you're not going to see that spike in consumption.
That's correct. That's correct. Yes, sir. Now, there is a system that part of our plan in the future is to get a real-time radio system where we can do exactly what you're talking about, but that's in the future, and that costs a lot more than what we're talking about.
I'm not saying that's something that should be looked toward. I'm just saying that that was more or less a moot point that was brought up earlier. That real-time evaluation of spikes in consumption only happens if you're aware of a possibility.
Yes,
and you're out there proactively looking at it.
Right.
I'll also add that we built a hydraulic model of this system to look at where do we need capacity improvements, because there's definitely some needs down in that system given its age and how small the lines are. And having this data is going to help us actually run that model in a better fashion and help us do some system planning that really needs to be done down there. We've already identified some initial improvements, but there's a lot of line upsizing and things that need to be done, and it's tied into the city system.
it's several locations, and so having access to this information is going to really help us hone in on, where do we need to make improvements in the system. So engineering is going to get a lot of benefit out of it as well.
I'm sure Director Mo's concern is that sticker shock that Calhoun County is facing with the new system. And so that's something that we all need to be exceptionally sensitive to, making sure we're fulfilling needs and not necessarily wants. And so you feel this is something that we absolutely need.
Yes, sir. Like Daryl was mentioning earlier, it'll save a tremendous amount of time and make us more efficient. And we'll have data that we can show the customer if there was any disputes of water usage, whether they had a leak on their system or not. We'll be able to tell that. So I think it's gonna, and it helped us when I was up at Western Canyon, and those systems were helping them emailing the customer a bar chart of what their usage was over the last 90 days helped a tremendous amount with the customer service for sure.
So those are going to be the same type meters that you're going to put in down there?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Same brand.
Meters are already purchased too. Meters are purchased, this is just installation.
And the old ones being 25 plus years old, is it possible that there's going to be a realization of water savings, because there may be some of those, out of those 1,000 meters that might be leaking, that are wasting water at this point? To a certain,
typically you see a more accurate metering of your water as it's used. That could lead to a water savings. More commonly, it is a more accurate billing of the water savings.
Especially on the low end. The older meters on the very low, like a toilet leaking, that very small amounts per minute. These newer meters are much more accurate than the old ones. Yes, sir.
Correct me if I'm memory failing me, but probably if they put in their meter, put in there in 93, 75% of them are under read.
Yes, sir. That's typically, they're usually slow.
And those were all electronic meters? Right?
These are all electronic.
So the
old ones, no, they were mechanical, no electronics. Yes, sir.
Any other comments or discussion, questions? Call the question, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Number 18, consideration of and possible action authorizing the general manager or CEO to negotiate and execute a contract with the most qualified vendor for our computerized maintenance management software system to support GBRA's asset management program in this town.
So just a little context and background. I think everyone's aware that establishing an asset management program was identified by the Sunset Review as something GBRA needed to do. So for the past 9 months, there's been a steering committee of operators throughout all divisions at GBRA and coming together to talk about building the asset management program, developing standardized procedures, data standard, identifying what we need out of a software system so that we can do good asset inventory and daily asset management activities. So that's what I'm going to talk about today, specifically the software. We're at the point in the process where in early August, we put out an RFP to solicit proposals for vendors of CMMS software. CMMS stands for Computerized Maintenance Management Software or System. Depending on what you're looking at, it can do a lot of different things. Our review and what staff feels like we need is we were asking for a very robust system, not that only does the maintenance management, which is the preventative and predictive maintenance, but also will do renewal planning and risk assessment so that we can in the future make capital plans and know the status of our systems. So I'm going to go over just a couple of the things we were trying to highlight as we were reviewing these RFPs. There's a real sense of needing it to be very easy to use for all of the staff. A lot of the operators would be using this almost on a daily basis. So we want to make sure that whatever system we have, they're not gonna, balk at using it, they're going to enjoy using it and see the benefit of it. You can see up here, similar to GIS, our goal is to make it where you can access from all devices, so either a phone or a tablet or your computer. There is a map interface, like I mentioned earlier, the linear assets, you can also navigate through a map if that's how people interpret the world better. There's scheduling. We can change the dashboard so that different users can make it look the way they want. And then really what we're looking for very robust is the asset management parts of it, that renewal planning and risk assessment. So we're beginning the implementation plan of the asset management program. The first one will be the CMMS purchase and rollout. Our goal is to kind of go across all divisions and start collecting asset inventory into the system. And then we're going to do a pilot of the full asset management process. And that gets into the condition data. We can use what David can be collecting through his condition assessments using the sewer camera. We've identified additional condition assessments that can be done, risk assessments, and then looking at the renewal planning with the hope of working on a subset of systems and having them ready in time for budget next year. These are our top priorities for the pilot. They're GBRA-owned systems. So these are going to be similar priorities when I talk later about the GIS data development. It's the same systems. We kind of want to have these in all systems and ready to go so that we can show you the benefit of the asset management program and really use it to inform our decision making and our planning during budgeting and that sort of thing. Are there any questions?
So we need a motion? Discussion or questions from this? Comments?
Will the GIS system, so like what I've heard today is that we have the touch thing that was getting out of date. When you took a picture of the cross members of the telephone lines, will you be able to then by your topographical colorings say, we have aging infrastructure of a transmission line for 7 miles that we don't specifically look at each one, but they've been there for 27 years. The average life of these is 20 years. We're 7 years over. We need to go on and budget immediately now that we're going to replace these as of this date, and that's the amount of cost it's going to be for that, which then aligns it with every other budget item within the GIS system. Therefore, we would know from a decision-making budget that that's coming in 5 years, and that's an expense we're going to have to, or that's too much, that doesn't do that.
That was perfect. That was better than I could have said it myself. That's exactly what it is intended to do. Yes.
It'll also provide additional information on top of it. It'll also help evaluate how much spend compares to you sell or replace with certain items. Or in some cases, it may be better to go ahead and replace it versus the amount you're doing to repair and keep in mind. But it helps track all that on the maintenance side of it.
So like him going out there and checking on it that day, if that was $47 of time, that would be tracked versus then in the future replacing the whole line versus having 27 checks. That would filter into that mathematical equation in theory and say, okay, even though there's only 40% of these that are needed to be updated, it's still better use of our money to replace all of them at the same time and replace that 40% because of costs or connections or discounts of the whole line versus a piece of line.
Yeah, part of that's the standard thing for an item like that. For pumps, you're looking at other features, looking at what's your efficiency, how much runtime, how much repairs, how much other things you're doing. So for gold, that's more of a standard. Looking at the inspection, physical inspection of it, compare that to previous pictures so that you know if it's regressively in condition or if it's still the same condition. You can also extend the life of that in the system if the inspections are showing.
And a portion of what you asked too, these software systems do capture costs of labor, so that can inform decisions of the sort of either or, which is more cost effective.
This is exactly what we asked y'all to do a couple of years ago, was to begin the process of developing this system. To look at all of our assets and replacement and preventive maintenance and all those types of things. My hat's off to you. I think it's a wonderful.
And I just want to say, I've only been here 9 months, but my first day was the beginning of this project. There's a great deal of buy-in from all of the divisions, all levels of GBRA, and in all of our discussions with other people with their asset management programs, that's kind of the make or break on how successful this can be. So I think we're very confident that it's going to be very successful and very well adopted. We have an ambitious schedule, but I also think we feel good that we can make those things happen.
Very good.
All right, seeing no other discussion, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, number 19, consideration of and possible action authorizing the general manager of CEO to negotiate and execute an agreement for limited QSE services for distributed generation. That's ERCOT with the Guadalupe Valley Electric Cooperative, Inc. and Shell Energy North America.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members.
If I may just interrupt, Mr. Chairman, on items 19, 20, and 22, I'm going to go ahead and ask staff to lay those out, but they are all agreements that have been drafted in principle that are asking y'all to authorize us to execute. If you have any legal questions and want to ask those at Tom in executive session, just let us know. We can obviously leave it pending to address those.
The chair's perspective, if anyone has a legal question, we will just hold the vote off until after executive session so that we can be fully informed on all of it.
Thank you. Just a little background on this agreement. As you all may know, the electrical system in the United States is divided into different regions that are kind of spread across the continent. Texas is part of 3 regions. One of them includes the western and northern panhandle. And other areas of the United States, other areas of the Plain States. One of them is to the west and includes the Trans-Pecos area of Texas and part of New Mexico and territories west. The bulk of Texas is within one region, and it is supervised by the Electric Reliability Council of Texas, or ERCOT. You all may all be familiar with ERCOT, but I just want to give you a little background on that. ERCOT has rules. They interface with the Public Utility Commission. They interface with people in the electrical industry. They have rules that people who buy and sell power and generate power have to comply with. And that includes agreements such as the one that we have with Guadalupe Valley Electric Cooperative. What this agreement is for the selection of a new QSE, or Qualified Scheduling Entity. It's being done at the request of GBEC. We don't deal directly with ERCOT except to provide reports and things like that. Periodically, we have to report on things like cybersecurity and different operational things, and we monitor things. But primarily, this is GBC dealing with the electrical industry. And the way the ERCOT rules are set up, you have to have a qualified scheduling entity that, for lack of a better analogy, operates more or less like a broker, like a stockbroker or a commodities broker, or somebody like that. A QSE, or a qualified scheduling entity, is an entity that goes out and puts bids on the open electrical market for power, either to buy or sell power. And the people that generate that and create that have to go through that type of entity to do it. So what this agreement is basically kind of like a brokerage agreement. Even though we're not dealing directly with ERCOT on sales, the way the system is set up, they need the approval of whoever's generating or providing electricity to the entity that's actually putting it on the market. So they want both us and GBEC to be part of it. There's not, in all honesty, there hasn't been a whole lot of wiggle room in the negotiations on this, because pretty much it's, like a brokerage contract. It's, if you want services, you get them. We're satisfied they did make some changes that are, helpful to us, and I can discuss them if you have any questions in closed session, or Courtney can help me with that too, I think. But we're satisfied with generally the way the contract reads, realizing that most of the provisions are set in stone. And that is it. In essence, it would be Shell Energy that is doing this, and they'll be the interface between GBEC and the market, and we're agreeing to that under this agreement. And the contract itself is a lot of different things about the interaction between the three parties and how funds are accounted for and who's going to deal with the market and who's going to deal with ERCOT on these transactions and things like that. So I don't know if y'all have any other questions on that. We can, whatever the board's pleasure is, we can do that.
My inclination would be to wait until after executive session because these are all interrelated, but I would look, we may have some operational questions need to be in open session, but the specific legal issues need to be discussed in closed session.
And this is 19, 20, and 22, or 21?
It's 19 and 20. And 21 is, I think, the ordinance, and 20 is a related, it's not a related contract with QSC, but it's also a contract with GBEC.
So why don't we go ahead and get the motion on the floor, then I will suspend the vote until after the executive session. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second? All right, let's lay out number 20.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Item 20 is a letter amendment. It would be the third letter amendment to the 1978 contract between GBRA and GBEC, who sell the power that is generated at the Hydro Lakes, and to GBEC. The agreement over the years has changed in duration and has changed in the price for the power. Right now it stands that we pay a set fee of $125,000 plus 3.14 cents per kilowatt hour sold to GBEC. GBEC approached us, and first of all, I want to say that the contract that we have right now allows GBEC to terminate the agreement, and they have provided notice, and the termination would be 2025. But that said, they have indicated that they're willing to discuss perhaps an extension of the contract at some point. But because of the gate failures on the Hydro Lakes, they believe that our capacity to generate has been reduced by about a third. And what is proposed here is a contract amendment that would not affect the kilowatt hour, but it would affect that standing fee of $125,000, and would reduce it by a third to $83,333.33, or essentially a 1/3 reduction. And that's the gist of this letter amendment. The rest of the contract would remain unchanged from the way it's been for several years.
Just a minor correction to that, we did approach GDC sometime after Lakewood. We recognize y'all are paying $5 per month for generation at 6 facilities, and you're not getting generation at 6 facilities. So to the extent you want a comparable reduction, let us know. They left it alone for a while, but after Dunlap, they did visit with their board and did ask for the third reduction, which I think is reasonable.
All right, we'll do the same with this motion. Let's go ahead and lay out mine.
Okay.
Do you want us to make a motion? 21.
on that?
Yes, please.
I'll move.
21, consideration of and possible action approving changes to the ordinances of Guadalupe-Blanco River Authority relating to boating, swimming, fishing, and other water-related activities on the GBRA hydroelectric lakes to wit: Lake Dunlop, Lake McQueen, Lake Placid, Lake Nolte, Lake Gonzales, Lake Wood, located in Comau, Guadalupe, and Gonzales counties.
Mr. Chairman, if it's all right, maybe this would be a good way to proceed here. I can lay out the general gist of the ordinance, and if y'all have questions, if you want to do it the same way you've done the other. This ordinance, as Kevin mentioned this at the beginning of the meeting, but what this ordinance is an attempt to conform the existing ordinances that we have, or replace the existing ordinances that we have with a set of ordinances, rather, that conforms to the independent expert panel report that Sandoval discussed with the board a while ago. What I've done is I've taken the ordinance that we had last time, and if y'all recall, basically what that did is identify the lakes up and down, and then basically say, you can't have that, you can't go out on the water, it's prohibited on each one of the lakes, with the understanding that we'd be back to amend this if the courts got its report, and we need to change it based on the way the temporary injunction is in the Williams and Steiner cases. So they have, and what I've I've attempted to do here is this. For each area that has been defined as a prohibited unsafe zone by the experts, I've essentially left the prohibitions the way they were in the prior ordinance. Basically, you can't get on, you can't get in the water. For areas that were identified as restricted zones under the ordinance, what I've tried to do here is set it up so that the restrictions that are mentioned in the expert reports are part of the restrictions in this ordinance. For example, it doesn't specifically say that you can be on a boat or a watercraft, but the only prohibitions in restricted areas are that you can't be in the water. Basically, you can't wade, swim, be on a tube, be on some kind of personal flotation device. The only other added condition that was in the expert report was that if you are on a watercraft, you need to have a Type 1 or a Type 3 Coast Guard certified and properly fitted personal flotation device or life jacket. So those things are in the ordinance. Now, in the ordinance, there is one area that Sam described in his discussion about the area from Safford down up to Lake Placid. Well, that includes the lake that is under the jurisdiction of the city of Seguin. And so that is not in this ordinance. The city has jurisdiction over that. So I haven't proposed to you all that we attempt to regulate that. We have mentioned this situation in the city of Seguin about a month ago before the last meeting. And I'm going to reach out to the city attorney again with this and kind of visit with him about that situation. But that's why that particular provision in that particular segment that Sam described in his talk is left out of this ordinance. Just going through it, it's pretty much the way I described it. It goes section by section and deals with each of the zones. Now, again, I'm sorry, but there is a typo in the document that you all have. In every paragraph B in section 2.3, 2.4, 2.5, 2.6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11, it says a violation of subsection B or C of this section is a Class C misdemeanor. Offense, no culpable mental state or criminal intent is required, and upon conviction, a person shall be fined an amount of to $500. It should be up to in each one of those sections. And if the board approves this ordinance, then we will fix that particular provision and attach it to the order that the board is requesting to be approved. Let me see if there's anything else that I want to mention to you all real quick. Yeah, exactly. Sam mentioned in his report, Sam mentioned in his presentation, and it's also in the report, that we have kind of had an informal type of situation where people that really need to get on can get on in prohibited zones, and the expert panel recommended that we continue that practice and enhance the bit. So what I have done at the end of the ordinance in section 2.14 is to discuss or to get into a consent procedure by which a person can petition general manager CEO for access. If you take a look at that section, it has a number of things that a person that's asking for consent to enter would have to put in their application. One of the things I want to point out, and this kind of it assumes that anybody that's going to want to go on the lake under these circumstances in a prohibited zone is going to be 21 or over. So I don't know how everybody feels about that particular issue, but I just wanted to highlight that for you because that's the way it's written here. And we can certainly discuss that, Mr. Chairman, if that's the pleasure of the board. But what it also says is that the general manager CEO can deny any request for consent to enter, and grant any request that meets the requirements of the ordinance, impose time constraints on the entry into the property, or on the entry to the prohibited zone, and require proof of insurance, waiver of claims, or indemnity for claims and damages as a condition to granting the consent to enter. That's also recommended in the expert report. So I think probably what would be envisioned here is a situation where somebody has a boat in a prohibited zone, they want to move it out, or they have something else that they need to move it out. Perhaps a situation where somebody is doing some repairs or taking care of something, it's not going to take very long. And so that procedure is set forth in section 2.14. Each one of those prohibition sections says that it's the defense of prosecution if somebody has prior written consent to enter into a prohibited zone that comes from the general manager's CEO. So that's how that procedure is set up in the ordinance itself. Let's see. The one other thing that doesn't have to do per se with swimming or boating on the lake is that there's now a general restriction provision in section 2.13 that makes it an offense under the ordinance if somebody moves the buoys or removes the buoys or any of the signage or anything like that, so that maybe we can anticipate some vandalism. And there's also general criminal sanctions for that, obviously, for destruction of property and things like that. But I thought perhaps I would recommend that we do a little extra measure here, just for the sake of making sure that it's clear that nobody's supposed to mess with these things. That pretty much sums up the ordinance the way it's written.
Okay, do I have a motion?
Motion.
Second. Okay, we'll hold that for after.
Can I ask a question now, or do you?
Operationally, no.
Yeah, operationally. These are all, like you said, with the city of Seguin, you plan on talking with the city attorney?
Yes.
This has been discussed with Guadalupe County's county attorney?
Yes, sir. And I failed to point out that because there is no change in Lake Gonzales at all right now, I haven't discussed that with Gonzales County yet. We're still waiting for, as Sam mentioned in this report, we're still waiting for Gonzales County to come out of the expert panel, so we don't know what they're going to do yet.
Okay, but that will be an additional discussion with the Gonzales County attorney?
Yes, sir, and it will be our officials over there, and it will be something that we're going to have to come back to the board with, because obviously we don't have the opinion of the expert panel.
Okay, we're talking about the boat. The boat was an issue that Director Eric mentioned, that if we share the boat that we purchased with Lake Gonzales after this has been discussed, then their law enforcement officials will be pretty much following the same kinds of things that Guadalupe County Sheriff's Office is going to be following.
Yes, sir. Each one of the provisions in here too says that it's a defense prosecution if you're a peace officer acting within the scope of your employment.
And they'll be operating that boat just like Guadalupe County Sheriff's Office will be operating that boat with the Gonzales Sheriff's Office or whoever the law enforcement.
The general prohibition, and I'm sorry, I forgot this, I'll mention this as well, the general prohibition in Gonzales County is still in effect. Both, it would be under this ordinance, but the court still has it in effect too, until it's still under the temporary injunction, it's still prohibited until we hear from the expert panel.
Yes, sir.
And I talked over you and interrupted you, is that what you were?
No, but that's where I was going, is I just wanted to make sure that once the 30 days and all of that was going to take place in the vote, I wanted to understand that it was going to be operated by the Gonzales County Sheriff and the Gonzales County Attorney were going to be looking at something.
Okay, I'll call for the vote after the executive session in case there's any questions of legal nature. Okay, number 22, consideration of and possible action authorizing the general manager CEO to negotiate and execute a memorandum of understanding with the preserve Lake Dunlop Association to work toward the restoration of Lake Dunlop Dam and to take steps forward towards the long-term sustainability.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to commend the Lake Dunlop folks for a moment from the day after the Dunlop, probably the day after the Dunlop failure. They reached out to us and started discussions, and it was all from a tone of how do we get this fixed? How can we work together to get this done? And the folks who represent PLDA, John Ivey's one of them who's here today, and then Jay Harmon and Beth Harrison. We've met continuously and constantly and had many phone conversations to get to where we are. So this is a What's before you is a small step, but it's a very important one. And moving forward, we can take Lake Dunlap restored. So the concepts in here, I'm going to lay out for you. This is an MOU between GBRA and ELDA. It's not legally binding or enforceable, so these are just concepts that allow us to move forward on more significant agreements. At some point, once their district is formed, which is the path they're going on, then we will have to have an operations agreement with that district, the new legal entity, laying out all the details, because there are a lot of unanswered questions, and the devil is in the details, but this is an important step for them and for us in putting some concepts on paper, some big concepts that we agreed to. Part of what, they also have to get approval from TCEQ for their district. TCEQ wants to see the nature of the relationship going forward between the two organizations, and so this helps with that packet. And there are obviously quite a few residents around Lake Dunlap, and they want to understand what they're going to be voting on when they have to vote on this district, and how GBRA is going to participate going forward. So this document sets forth some basic concepts that we're in agreement on, and that PLDA does support the recommendations of GBRA's internal and third-party engineering consultants for a new type of gate, which would be the hydraulic press gate structure. GBRA has committed to continue to perform the design engineering work for Lake Dunlap and pay for all of that work. We expect to have the 30% completion mark will be done by the end of this month. And then if we stay on track, which we anticipate we will, the full design will be done by late spring or early summer. PLDA will continue to pursue the creation of their water control and improvement district, and they are on track to do that through, as I mentioned, a May election. The source of the funding for the project will be proceeds of debt issued by GBRA. Debt service will come from a contract revenue pledge from the district to GBRA. The district will levy an ad valorem tax to fund the contract revenue pledge to GBRA, and GBRA will contribute all gross revenues generated from Lake Dunlap hydroelectric operations to the district. Part of PLDA's request is that we do go back and reinstitute hydro when the gates are repaired. That was important for them. Dunlap does generate the most revenue from the hydro system, so I think it makes sense from an operations point. And then GBRA is committed to perform all routine operation and maintenance associated with the Dunlap Dam. And the district will accrue a sinking fund for future capital repair projects from the excess revenue from the hydro system. So there are a lot of questions for both sides about how we're going to work out the O&M and what the financial picture will look like for both entities and what we're committing to. So again, we don't have those details worked out. Those are details we're going to have to work out, and I'm confident that we can work those out, work through those. And so as we move this forward, we'll come back to you with a number of different updates and probably agreements and setting out exactly financial liabilities and cost allocation for the different parts of the system moving forward. And with that, I'd like to invite the representative from PLDA, Mr. Chairman John Ivey, to make some comments.
Well, I would say good morning, but it's afternoon. My name's John Ivey, and I'm the acting president of the LDA, because Mr. Harmon is decided to take a vacation. I think he's been working real hard on this project with Kevin and everybody. So I have a little statement here that our association and our board of directors would like y'all to say. On behalf of PLDA board and our members, I'd like to express our appreciation of the work of GBRA towards the goal of restoring Lake Dunlap as soon as possible. We recognize that there is still lots of work to be done to finalize our agreement and begin the actual reconstruction of the dam. However, we feel this proposed agreement is a great first step forward. The partnership we are proposing will enable the restoration of Lake Dunlap Dam, and it will create a funding mechanism to help ensure that Lake Dunlap is here for the future generations to enjoy. Thank you from our board of directors.
Well, thank you. I think this beginning step is really a testament towards the progress that can be made when everyone works together for a goal, and as opposed to fighting each other for something I really appreciate the role your group has played and you have played personally. I think it makes a very powerful. Anyone?
What a breath of fresh air. You know, we can focus on all the things that are wrong, who's at fault, or we can focus on, we got a problem and we got to fix it. And that's what you guys have done, and we really appreciate it very much. And we're willing to do everything we can and figure out how to fix that problem.
Amen.
Do I have a motion? Second. I'll also hold this over for the vote until, because there's some legal questions during the executive session. 23, consideration of the possible action ratifying the agreement and subsequent amendments between Archer Western Construction LLC and the Guadalupe-Blanco River Authority executed on or about July 11, 2019 for the emergency construction of a new pump station in the Dunlop Canal to continue service in the regional raw water delivery system following the failure of the spill gate at Dunlop Dam.
Thank you. I'll just briefly walk you through the activities we undertook in this contract in order to keep the service going into that system, which is about 25 million gallons per day water supply for a big part of our basin. So just to remind you on the issues that we experienced, the way the system functioned prior to the spillgate failure at Dunlap is that the water level upstream of the dam was driven up high enough to where it pushes water down the canal that then goes down to the powerhouse where electricity is generated. But along the way, we have the intake for that 25 million gallon per day pump station. It's right here. And so once you experience the spillgate failure, this is only able to flow. It relies on, I guess, the top 6 to 7 feet of the lake in order to push water to this direction. With the spillgate failure, we lost the top 12 feet of the lake, so we were no longer able to divert water down the canal. So, the first step we immediately took was to put some temporary diesel pumps out there the next day after the spillgate failure to restore that service. Obviously, that's an expensive operational cost, so what we undertook under this contract was the next step of that temporary solution. And so there were, I guess, several alternatives that were analyzed as a first step, kind of screening analysis of the alternatives. There was some options looked at of just putting some sheet pile out in the river to restore that elevation. Those alternatives came at a much higher price than what we ultimately selected and had some unique risks that the option we selected do not have. Also, putting a new intake pipe to the existing pump station out to the river was evaluated. One of those options actually had to cross the dam, which has created some construction challenges, and then just the integration with the pump station and the timing of keeping everything online created some scheduling challenges, and those options were more costly. So what we ended up doing is basically building a submersible, it's basically a wet well in the river system. So what was done is, this part of the canal shown in yellow was dredged down to a lower elevation so that the dam would still push water in this direction. Just a little bit of a wet well right here with some submersible pumps was built, and a coffer-dam type setup was put right here, basically a sheet pile with some gravel around it. We just pump over just a few feet of additional lift to get water into this blue area. And so this blue area is formed by a concrete weir that already existed in here, and now this dam. So we basically just have a little bathtub that we're pumping to allow that pump station to continue. To show you what that looks like, it was entirely constructed out of sheet piling. So part of what led to increased cost was that our operations and engineering departments collaborated and realized we were going to need some screening of debris, which is prevalent in that system. So there was some scope changes made to have some debris management systems. Also, the soils ended up being more rigid than were initially anticipated. So some larger pile drivers were required to accomplish this work. But these sheet piles were driven in to form the wet well. It was then cut down to the elevation it ultimately sits at, that you see in this picture. Then a platform was put on top so we would have access to work and pull those pumps as needed. And And then within that sump formed by that wet well, you can see these column pipes that just discharge out the side of the box and into the area that's just I guess downstream on the canal. And you can see that area being excavated here. So it's a really simple system. It mimics kind of like what a lift station would do in a wastewater collection system. Because it's a very short piping distance and very little head. I mean, this is it's a high capital cost to build, but our long-term O&M costs are going to be very small. Use a very small amount of energy to accomplish that pumping. So ultimately, that project came in at a cost of $4.7 million to get all this built on an emergency basis. Given the construction that was used, we do feel confident that if we found ourselves in an unfortunate situation where replacement of the dam were delayed, that this could remain in service for a significant amount of time and continue our water supply operations until those challenges can be overcome. So I think the item before you is ratification of that contract that we've done on a design build basis to get all this done. You know, the initial dam failure happened, I guess, back in May, and this was all online for our water supply in September.
Have a motion? So moved. Second. On this item, do you anticipate any legal questions on that contract? I don't see. That's right. So, let's have discussion and questions, and I would call for the vote on this.
Charlie, good question about all of this that's been put in place here to operate during the construction and the replacement of the dam. Will that remain in place after the dam is repaired? Or will any of this, does this have useful life after that? Or is it going to be all pulled out?
It really doesn't serve a purpose if the dam is restored, because the dam pushes water to an even higher level than this canal pumps to. But it can be done in a way to where we've made this investment. We could route the canal around what's been built just by doing some excavation. So we have really either one of those options.
Any other questions? Call the question, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? All right, so it's 5-1. I anticipate a fairly long executive session. What's the pleasure of the board? Would you like to hear the remaining 2 discussion items and then break now for 10-15 minutes?
Mr. Chairman, they are discussion items, so if you wanted to fund them, no harm on that. If you wanted to go straight to exec, that's an option.
So I would hate to waste the people that have, the staff that has prepared time to do that. Why don't we do this? Why don't we take about a 10-minute break? And is there sandwiches or?
Yes, sir, there should be sandwiches.
And then why don't we eat in place, come back and eat in place and listen to the 2 discussion items, then break for executive session, deal with that, and then come back and do this. So I will gavel us back in at 5 after 1. Okay, we are back in session, and we have the 2 discussion items. And if it's all right with the presenters, we'll eat, but we won't be rude. To the best we can. Yes.
Yes, thank you so much for taking the time to stay, because it does all tie together. So we've done a great job of building the suspense for this item. I alluded to this several times, and to Vanessa. So GIS data is a key component of the asset management program and that system. And we also obviously use the GIS data a lot operationally. So what we'd like to do is engage GBRA engineers in a contract to focus on getting the data for these GBRA-owned systems in a full, complete, and accurate state. I mentioned earlier we have data, it's all over the place. Some is just at the beginning, some is close to final. We really want to kind of compile perfect data and put it into these new systems. So that's what this item is about. We wanted to make sure you're aware that we're going to engage in this contract and see if you have any questions. or concerns. So I've listed the systems and then also what the consultant will help to, the steps that will help to go through to ensure data completeness and quality. Basically, they're going to be a team helping to make sure we stay on schedule with that ambitious asset management schedule so that the data will be ready to go as we're ready to go in using that system. Are there any questions?
Any questions? Clearly, you've got a big task ahead of you, but you made a great start. And I know that this has been a concern or an area of great interest for the board long before the Sunset Committee ever made their recommendation. We were moving in that direction. Prior to Sunset, we thank you for everything you do.
Happy to do it. It's been a great team to work with, so thank you for your support.
Absolutely.
All right, Mr. Hickman.
No surprise to any of you, it's continued to be dry. We've had some small rains, but you know, this over the past 90 days, the tail end of the summer, this map shows kind of how the rainfall's departed from our normal rainfall. And if you look at in general, the upper part of the basin, for the past 90 days, the normal rainfall of 8 to 10 inches, and between 10 and 15 inches in the lower basin. You see we've fallen well short of that, especially in Comal-based counties, where we've got 6 to 8 inches below your normal rainfall, which is kind of right at what you tip. So basically almost no rain in those areas in the Canyon Lake region. And also over the Edwards recharge zone, we've had a pretty far below normal rainfall for the summer period as well. However, again, just because we've been coming off that wet period last fall and somewhat last winter, the spring flow is still remaining right at about the average for this time of year, which is great for us. Just kind of just shy of 300 CFS flowing out of the Comal Springs. Canyon, however, the inflow to Canyon at Spring Branch is started to have the decline that you get when you don't have rainfall and have hotter conditions, and so looking at we've actually triggered some of the drought provisions in our FERC permit. The rolling 90-day average of inflow has become less than 90 CFS for 45 consecutive days, and so we've now triggered the drought provisions of our FERC permit. So just as of this week, we've lowered the releases from, previously they were a minimum of 100. At the beginning of September, they were a minimum of 150 for our trout releases. Now we're down closer to 60 for water supply releases. And you can see that period where we were having to release more water for the trout agreement and the FERC permit really kind of drawn down the reservoir when we got those lower inflows. So we've gotten from being a little bit above conservation storage down to 906.5, so 2.5 feet low right now. For the first time this year, you're starting to see flows get slightly below median flows, but still kind of right around the medians for this time of year, pretty much throughout the basin. So conditions are still good for water supply, but we're starting to see a decline in the rivers with the drier conditions. And you see that the drought monitor is now showing several parts of Texas an extreme drought, including kind of our Canyon Lake region. And pretty much all of our basin is in some drought category at this time. This is based on more than just stream flow, so a lot of it probably due to soil moisture with the lack of drought, because river conditions are still fairly good. But looking forward, we're showing for the next 3 months slightly above average chance for above average rainfall in our basin. It must be mostly planned for November, because you look out to the December, January, February outlook, and you're looking at kind of a below average rainfall forecasting for that later in the winter period. So, with that, the drought is expected to persist across all of central Texas for the next few months with those forecasts. But again, the river conditions are still good right now, and Canyon's at a level pretty close to conservation storage. So.
We're still in El Nino?
We're in a neutral pattern. So.
Jim says I'm getting 3 inches. Thursday night, so it's okay. It's one man.
You're 8 inches short according to the map, so.
All right, I thought you were trying to get by without any questions, just looking around, everybody had their mouth full. But, thank you.
Thank you.
All right,
I don't have anything else.
okay, I'm getting ready to call executive session. All right, we're going back into open session at 2:15. We have a motion for item number 19 that has already been moved and seconded. It's the consideration of impossible action authorizing the general manager, CEO, to negotiate and execute an agreement for limited QSE services for distributed generation with the Guadalupe Valley Electric Co-op and Shell Energy North America. We already have a motion and a second. I'll open for discussion. Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Number 20, consideration of impossible action authorizing the general manager, CEO, to negotiate and execute a letter to the 1978 agreement between Guadalupe-Blanco River Authority and Guadalupe Valley Electric Co-op, Inc. for power sales. We already have a motion. It's been seconded. I'll open it for discussion and questions. Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? 21, consideration of impossible action approving changes to the ordinances of the Guadalupe-Blanco River Authority relating to boating, swimming, fishing, and other water-related activities on the GBRA hydroelectric lakes, to wit, Lake Dunlop, Lake McQueenie, Lake Placid, Lake Nolte, Lake Gonzales, and Lake Wood, located in Comau, Guadalupe, and Gonzales County, Texas. We already have a motion and a second. I'll open for discussion and questions.
Mr. Chairman, just a point on that one, just to remind you all, we would ask that the board approve the changes that I talked about, changing of to the words up to in each one of the violation sections of the ordinance.
Right.
I do have a question. You mentioned getting a boat and having the sheriffs operate it. Are the game wardens still working?
I don't know about their current functions right now. I was going to address
Game
that.
wardens are still available to help when they have time. Since it's hunting season, they've indicated that they will have limited resources available when we call. So right now, it's primarily going to be the sheriff's office.
Next summer?
Sure. I think they'd be more active next summer.
Any other questions? Discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, number 22, consideration of impossible action authorizing the general manager, CEO, to negotiate and execute a memorandum of understanding with Preserve Lake Dunlop Association to work toward the restoration of Lake Dunlop Dam and to take steps forward toward the long-term sustainability of Lake Dunlop. We already have a motion on the floor that's been seconded. I'll open for discussion and questions.
All questions.
Questions called, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, that concludes our action items. I will entertain a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Second. Stand adjourned.